Okay. Hope everyone's doing good today. Today is August 17th, 2023. Um, we're going to be doing a lot of coverage of of some stuff that a little bit older, like by a week or so, mostly cuz have to do some catch up on stuff from not like having time to really do anything. And like there's probably going to be some new developments from stuff that we will cover today. Yeah. Yeah, there is new stuff here. Okay. Um yeah, I guess we'll start off with the Ontario Greenbelt stuff and like how like awful that is. So, yeah, for those who haven't like been keeping up with stuff lately, um Doug Ford has been doing Doug Ford things and just completely eviscerating the Greenbelt. And the governor general has even like called him out on his bullshit, and like even reporters have completely like demolished his talking point over and over again. Why? Because he and his fucking rich buddies just want to make a shit ton of money. That's the only reason why. Because like um the areas that he's opened up for land development have been for nothing but multi-million dollar like mansions, right? And like the funny thing is like I've seen like the clips of him on like Twitter and whatever, on like Twitter or whatever, being like, oh well, the liberals did it like fucking 15 to 17 times or whatever the fuck, but like it doesn't really matter because a lot of those were disputes, like the territorial disputes of the Greenbelt, as well as the, you know, they weren't opening it for fucking like nonsensical bullshit like this, right? So get into like first little bit of it.
So this may look like a mere stack of papers. It's, about 100 pages long, but it's from Ontario's Auditor General. And what it actually is as scathing and systematic a takedown as I've ever seen of the Ontario government on the question of how it carved up the green belt, protected green space for development.
This goes all the way to the top, all the way to the premier. His fingerprints are all over this.
Yeah, and like the funny thing about this, right, is that this is like the only like reasonable um thing that I would like to see happen would be, you know, Doug Ford and his minister for um like land development and whatever step down, because like this is insanely fucking corrupt, right? But realistically that's not gonna fucking happen, which is unfortunate. Like honestly, I think he should be going to jail for this, like, but that just won't happen.
This is part of an obvious culture of corruption across this conservative government.
The government says it disagrees, in effect saying, cut us some slack.
When you're in a housing crisis, when you have an inferno happening, the firefighters run to the fire. They don't run away from it. In my position,
Wait, what?
I have to deal with the crisis.
But let's see if I can summarize.
Okay, who fucking cares? Like, okay, like a lot of like every single fucking province and territory had to deal with a crisis like that was what, like 2 fucking years? Well, 2 to 3 fucking years in total during like COVID. That was like far less predictable and, you know, more more insane than this. Like, this is not a hard problem to solve, right? Like, first of all, you shouldn't be touching protected land anyways, right? And then, you know, you just easily build fucking affordable housing or public housing, right? I think when it comes down to that, we should be following in the footsteps of Venice, but you know, we have a bunch of fucking hogs here who are absolutely terrified of like any form of like even like walkable city because they think that, you know, fucking the government is trying to control them or whatever the fuck, right?
This. The Auditor General is making the case that when it came to deciding which plots of land to strip of protected status, paving the way for development, the deck was stacked. One man pre-selected sites based on what developers wanted. He constrained the selection process so as to effectively force his picks through with little regard for the agricultural or environmental harm, all but ignoring the overwhelming majority of citizens who had weighed in, blatantly serving the interests of developers who stand to make billions, and under pretenses, public statements that don't quite add up. Now, I spent some time in the Greenbelt back in December with 2 reporters from the Narwhal. You're going to meet them because it's with their help that by the end of this, you'll have a full understanding of what's at stake, what the Auditor General thinks went so wrong with the process, and why a lot of people are now very angry.
Well, yeah, and like that's another thing. Like, a lot of this is just going to make people very fucking angry on top of that, right? Like, you know, not really too impressed by it, even though I don't live in Ontario, right? Like, this is just completely fucking ridiculous.
So let's understand the basics. The Ontario Greenbelt is this huge tract of land, about 2 million acres of farmland, forest, and wetland.
Yeah.
And it kind of
like, the thing is that some of the, what is it, like 200,000 acres that he's taking out of it? Is it 200,000 or is it 20,000? I don't remember off the top of my head. Either way, like, it's taking, or he's removing, like, fucking farmland from this, right? Which is going to hinder Ontario's export of farm goods, right? As well as the fact of, like, this also sets the precedent of, okay, he's doing, or he's removing, like, say, let's say 20,000 acres this year. What's stopping him from next year taking like 200,000 acres, or, and in the following year after that, like fucking 500,000 acres, right? Nothing. Like, he needs to be held to accountable for as far as I'm concerned. He should be thrown in fucking jail for this. Like, he says that there's no collusion, but yet we have time and time again, we see him fucking colluding with land developers, right? And, you know, they weren't even like, he wasn't even fucking holding like, you know, them up for like bidding at the very least, which I still think that would be fucking insane, right? But it doesn't matter. Like, there is no fucking I guess the best way I can put it is there's no fucking justice for these corrupt assholes doing shit like this, right? Because remember, when you steal from the poor, it's okay, but when you steal from the rich, it's not okay. And like, I imagine a lot of like, you know, the farmers that are within the Greenbelt are like, for example, like the Greenbelts for example, that do a lot of farming there are not like too super fucking rich, right?
Around the greater Toronto area.
I think that size is really part of it. This is one of the first like large-scale environmental protection plans in Canada, which makes it really important.
Yeah, and the funniest thing about this is that the Greenbelt was put in place by a conservative, right? But you know, we'll just completely fucking ignore what your party did, like, you know, a couple decades ago to like try and preserve like some of Ontario's like natural beauty, right? But no, it doesn't fucking matter.
Especially after World War II, our cities were kind of exploding outwards, right? You know,
Sprawl, yeah.
sprawling outwards, all these like neighborhoods in every direction. And the Greenbelt was kind of a recognition that we couldn't do that forever, that we actually needed to set aside some of those natural places, some of that farmland, so that we didn't accidentally use it all up.
It's been protected since 2005, completely off limits to development, until late last year when the Doug Ford progressive conservative government decided to carve parts of it up, freeing about...
Remember, he tries pushing the fucking talking point that the Liberals have taken fucking parts out of the Greenbelt like 17 different times. Keep in mind that, again, it was land disputes that they were doing, and it was only like, say, I don't know, 15 acres at most or something like that, right? Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, it's not much. Because just this little bit, or just this one thing that Doug Ford has been doing has been more than what the fucking Liberals have done, like the provincial Liberals.
About 7,400 acres for development.
We will open up the Greenbelt, not all of it. We're going to open a big chunk of it up, and we're going to start building.
The goal, build 50,000 homes. But how they chose those specific 7,400 acres of previously protected land, and that almost all of it, in the end, belonged to just 2 developers whose land...
As well as they're not going to be made for affordable housing. They're going to be multi-million-dollar mansions.
value just skyrocketed. That begged looking
The
into.
reason why the land developers want this land is because it's prime real estate, right? The issue with that is that, you know, it's just another fucking way that the rich fuck over the like literally everyone else, because, you know, they want all this fucking land to themselves. First of all, it completely destroys, like, they'll completely destroy the fucking ecosystem that they'll be developing on, and, like, you know, possibly even like removing some farmland from there as well. And, you know, there's a fuck ton more to it.
The Auditor General, Bonnie Lysyk, says the man masterminding this selection process was the Chief of Staff of the Ontario Housing Minister. Now, the minister is Steve Clark. The Chief of Staff, not specifically...
For the record, I think both of these individuals should be thrown in jail for this. Because, not gonna lie, we have, like, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is, like, super fucking illegal, right? And, I think that it's gotten to the point where politicians like fly so close to the fucking sun that they think they can get away with anything, right? And I think this would be an excellent example of, not letting like any form of politician getting away with disastrous legislation and the and like disastrous legislation and corruption like this.
Named in the report. But at a news conference, the Auditor General said he was the current Chief of Staff to the minister, which would be Ryan Amato, seen here on his LinkedIn page.
So for people who
the funny thing
haven't
about
watched a political
a funny thing about that guy is like the only positions that he's actually held, like that guy likes talking about like, oh, how he's had like fucking working class positions or whatever the fuck. I'm like, bitch, what? You've been the president of like the lowest thing you've been is like the president of a fucking like hockey club or something like that. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
show in their life or maybe don't care about politics. A chief of staff is the senior most political member of a minister's office. They're kind of like when you say boss's boss, they're the boss.
Amato, according to Lissick, led a small team called the Greenbelt Project Team to decide, of all the Greenbelt that could be open for development, which parcels of land to choose.
What followed cannot be described as a standard or defensible process.
Lissick says the process was flawed from the very start. So first, that the team was sworn to secrecy. Their work was confidential.
Look, we expect our government.
And like just that alone should raise some red flags, right? Like if that doesn't raise some red flags alone, like I don't know what fucking will for those that it doesn't, right?
To be transparent with the public that elected them. And in Ontario, we have processes to ensure that the public is part of any deliberation over environmental or energy policy. But what has been described in the Auditor General's report is the complete opposite of that.
Second, they were given just a 3-week timeline to choose which sites would lose Greenbelt protection.
That is not enough time for them to consult everyone that needs to be consulted. And what the Auditor General describes...
but like the thing with Doug Ford that we've seen time and time again is he doesn't give a shit. Like, if it makes him money and makes him rich, he doesn't care. Right? But like, even doing like the bare fucking minimum of being a decent fucking human being, he won't do. Right? So
is they were limited again and again and again.
And third, the list of sites up for consideration was handpicked by the Chief of Staff himself.
The team only assessed 22 sites as options for removal from the Greenbelt, of which 21 were provided to them by the Housing Minister's Chief of Staff.
In the end, they settled on 15 sites, 12 of which were put forward to the Chief of Staff by the developers themselves. According to Lissick, 2 prominent developers gave packages of information on their properties during a dinner function. These were specific requests to remove their land from Greenbelt protection. In the end, they had 5 sites in mind, and...
Of the 15 sites ultimately selected, these 5 land sites represent about 92% of the approximately 7,400 acres removed from the Greenbelt in December last year.
yeah.
Okay, so I think we're getting close to where we're going. Where are we going?
Well, we are headed to an area really close to the Dauphin Rouge Agricultural Preserve.
This is the most fertile, richest agricultural land in the entire country. It's got some, the farmland here and the food that grows here is so special.
The real sting here for many is that the vast majority of the land acreage that's been cut out, more than 80% of it, is considered prime agricultural land. effectively the highest quality
Yeah,
farmland.
but like, since Doug Ford is showing his true colors and essentially saying, "Hey, I don't give a fuck about, you know, the people that elected me. Like, why should I, you know, why would I not do this, right?" Because like, the funny thing is that I imagine a lot of these farmers actually voted for Ford, right? Because generally in more rural areas they tend to vote more conservative. So I imagine a vast majority of them did vote for Ford, and now Ford is, you know, fucking doing this to them. So it's not surprising.
In the entire province. But that's not all.
Wetlands in particular around here naturally filter the water that runs through. And also, waterways like this and the green space around them are really important for making sure this area doesn't flood, which is something that not a lot of people know.
So how does that work exactly?
So wetlands act like sponges. So you know, when water falls, wetlands are able to naturally absorb that excess drain, right? Whereas if you imagine rain falling on concrete, on pavement, in cities, it just collects, right? It stays on the surface.
Right.
Wetlands allow it to naturally go into the ground and protects, you know, surrounding property and humans and life.
So here's the shocker. The Auditor General says there was, quote, little expert input on these or any of the usual things a government would consider when picking out which land to pave over, especially when we're talking about protected land.
Can you see the whole big picture? Are they allowed to see the whole big picture? That includes First Nation chiefs. That includes municipalities. That includes engineers, developers, you know, farmers. Were they able to talk to all those people and figure
No.
out which sites were best?
No, they weren't.
And when you're arbitrarily picking sites,
Because
that
if they were at the very least consulted, it would take more than fucking 3 weeks, right? But, you know, this is just done, or this is being just done as a fucking ploy to make him richer and his buddies richer. It's the only reason why.
are in, you know, spaces that have been designated as floodplains, or in spaces that don't have the infrastructure and protections you need to mitigate flood risk, then are you really building houses that will help Ontarians?
No. Because again, it's mostly going to be multi-million-dollar mansions. That's all it's going to be. Because, again, this is prime real estate. Why the fuck would they be, like, building affordable housing here? Like, it won't make the fucking developers shit tons of money.
Now, Doug Ford's defense all along has been that, as painful as it is to carve up the Greenbelt, it's a relatively small price to pay to help solve a crisis.
1/3 of 1%, I'm going to repeat that number, 1/3 of 1% was taken out of the Greenbelt. We have a housing crisis, the likes of which this province and this country has never seen before.
But the auditor...
Yeah, but the funny thing about that, though, is it's not that there isn't a lack of housing. There's more than enough housing, even in, like, fucking the Metro Toronto area alone, to house a vast majority of the population of people that live in Toronto, and then some, right? It's not a lack of units available. What the main problem is that it's that the landlords, or those who own the fucking units, are jacking up the prices so incredibly fucking high that people, you know, can't afford to live there. And even if they are able to afford to live there, they're only living paycheck to paycheck, right? as far as I'm concerned, what I think should be done, this can be done either provincially or federally or whatever the fuck at this point. Like, I genuinely don't care. Is either buying up these vacant houses that are driving up the market value of these units, or just which I think would be more preferable, just completely fucking getting rid of the unjustifiable relationship of landlord tenant, right? Like, it's completely and utterly ridiculous. Like, I imagine that if one of those things was to happen, it would be the former, right? But I just don't see that happening, because as we've clearly seen, like, time and time again, and have covered on the broadcast before, a lot of MPs, MMPs, or MPPs, premiers, even most of cabinet in the federal in the federal House of Commons have properties that they rent out, right? And this goes across party lines. A lot of them are conservatives, a lot of and then followed by liberals, and then there's like a couple that are NDP. But like, the NDP lately has been kind of pissing me off, because like, all that they're trying to do at this point is just out liberal the liberal, and like, it's very hard to justify supporting them. But that's a whole different conversation that doesn't really revolve around this conversation. But yeah, it's completely fucking ridiculous. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I think every single person in any form of position of power when it comes to government should be making as much money as the lowest paid member of society.
General says these two things have nothing to do with each other, that the government had already allocated 1.5 million new homes, that's the stated long-term goal, to various municipalities before the Greenbelt was cut up. To put it another way, there's already land to build on. The government didn't need to turn to the Greenbelt to build homes. What's more, Lissick points out we still have no idea how much of the land can actually be developed by 2025, which is the government's promise, because the project team just didn't have the time to consider it. You know, the chief planner for Durham region, which is where a big chunk of the land is, says it will take as many as 25 years to have full infrastructure service for housing development there. So if there's a housing crisis, what part of that exactly is solved by cutting open the Greenbelt? Maybe the biggest question we don't have an answer to is who knew what. The report lays bare how the housing minister's chief of staff orchestrated virtually everything we've mentioned. But did the housing minister know about this? I mean, he's supposed to be his boss, after all, right? Or did the premier know about this? Well, both say no, they had no knowledge, which leaves open two possibilities. Either they're lying, or...
Like, I'm not even convinced that they didn't have knowledge of this. Like, there's no shot that they didn't have knowledge of this, right? Like, you know, it's... I think that it's been, like, confirmed since this, since August 10th that, you know, they have known about this. And even I think during, or even I think during this, there was like a lot of like journalism done that, you know, they knew about this, right? So chances are very good that they're lying. And like, you know, whenever pressed on the issue by reporters, you know, not gonna lie, it looks like fucking Doug Ford was about to cry because they heard his fifis or whatever.
As the Auditor General suggests, they still kind of screwed up because they ought to have known. After all, if you're not looped in to a matter of such political sensitivity and material consequence, what are you doing exactly? The other big question, though, is what happens next. The Auditor General put forward 15 recommendations on all kinds of things, ranging from transparency to better communication, clarifying of roles, and the government has accepted all of them but one. Recommendation 14 is for the government to reevaluate its choices. You know, take a proper look at the land being cut out of the Greenbelt, given how unfair, biased, secretive, and ill-informed the selection process was. Ford's response, that's the one thing he won't do.
Yeah, sure.
We'll be right back.
I totally fucking believe that. Like, it's not that he hasn't, you know, done incredibly fucking corrupt things beforehand, right?
We're going to begin tonight with a scathing new report from Ontario's Auditor General. She has found multiple issues with the Ford government's development deals involving protected land. Bonnie Lysyk took a closer look at Ontario's Greenbelt and the province's decision to carve out 7,400 acres of it to build 50,000 homes. It was part of a bigger goal to build 1.5.
I must have gotten my numbers mixed up.
5 million. That land is supposed to be off limits to development. In her 93-page report, Lysyk says how the land sites were selected was not transparent, fair, objective, or fully informed. She found the Ford government favored certain developers closely connected to the office of Housing Minister Steve Clark. And she writes, there was sufficient land for the target of 1.5 million homes to be built without the need to build on the Greenbelt. Premier Doug Ford says he takes full responsibility for mistakes that were made.
The process should have been better, and I'm admitting the process should have been better. But when you're in a housing crisis, when you have an inferno happening, you know, the firefighters run to the fire. They don't run away from it. In my position, I have to deal with the crisis.
Ontario's Auditor General, Bonnie Lysyk, joins me now. Auditor General Lysyk, welcome to Power and Politics.
Thank you for having me.
You were listening, I know, to the Premier's news conference this afternoon to respond to your report, and I'm wondering overall what your reaction was to what he said.
I thought it was fair. I thought both the minister and the Premier agreed and followed through with the agreement on the 14 recommendations we have in the report. We did receive full cooperation from the Chief of Staff.
The funny thing is if I'm not mistaken, I don't really think they gave a shit about the recommendations that was presented by the Auditor General, right? And like, honestly, I don't even think that, like, the recommendations that were made, I don't even think that would be enough for this, like, nonsensical bullshit that he's pulling, right? Like, at this point, like, nothing less of, like, Doug Ford stepping down and his chief of staff for housing as well. Like, nothing short of that would be satisfactory, right?
To the Premier, as well as from the Secretary of the Cabinet, and their responses are incorporated in our report, and the responses from the Premier and the Minister are consistent
I'm
with
so
that.
tired.
The one area that we'd hope to have a response that might be a little bit different is the one regarding the revisiting of the decision to remove the lands from the Greenbelt, those particular properties.
Yes.
You know, again, the policy is open the Greenbelt, the actual action is how do you pick out which pieces of property that you choose to remove from the greenbelt. And based on the work that we did, we saw that the decision making around the removal of specific land sites was not fair, was didn't take into account good land planning, didn't take into account environmental considerations, agricultural situations, was dismissive of land planning, like I mentioned. I think we thought that that decision could be revisited given the new information.
And the fact that that is the one recommendation that they have not committed to, in fact, following through on, does that not avoid getting to the core issue of whether or not these lands should have been removed in the first place?
Both the premier and the minister told me that they did not know how the lands were selected for the removal. And so the recommendation was in the report because if you don't know how those lands were chosen, and now you know that the process that was used was inappropriate and gave preferential treatment to those who had access to the chief of staff, to the Minister of Housing, one would have expected the decision to be revisited.
When you say the Premier said he did not know the way the process was being conducted, from your investigation, from your interviews, do you accept that? To what degree was Premier Ford aware of what was going on?
I spoke with both the Premier and the Minister and asked them very directly whether they were aware of the process, whether they were involved in the selection of the lands, and in both cases, each one said no. I have no reason to think otherwise, other than when a decision is made with certain information that at the end of the day is incorrect or perhaps inappropriate, one would expect that decision to be revisited.
I mean, he did return again repeatedly to that issue, as you outlined, that he had to, that it was the imperative to remove this land from the Greenbelt, to build those 50,000 homes, to answer the acute housing crisis in the province. But that is exactly contradictory to what you found and laid out in your report, is it not?
That is correct. We
absolutely,
the housing task force, there was an housing affordability task force that provided the recommendation to the government that the 1.5 million homes was needed. In their report, at the same time, they articulated that lands from the Greenbelt weren't needed to achieve the 1.5 million target. We as well, in the last few months, talked to the chief planners in Durham, in York, and in Hamilton, and they reinforced that there is enough land.
A funny thing about this is, a funny thing about like just the housing affordability within Canada alone has gotten so bad that a mayor within Toronto can't even afford a fucking, like, to rent a fucking house in her own fucking backyard, right? And so she's living with her parents. Like, this is a fucking mayor. Like, it's completely and utterly ridiculous on how dumb the price of housing is in Canada. Like, it's absurd.
Available outside of the Greenbelt to provide the housing target of 1.5. So the land availability is not the issue. The speed at which it can be built perhaps is the issue. The other part of it is that the Municipal Association, EMO of Ontario, also indicated that there was sufficient land available. And in fact, when we were doing our work, we found that the Ministry of Housing had allocated the 1.5 million out already to municipalities and given them the targets a week prior before these lands were recommended for removal from the Greenbelt.
So the fact that the Premier continues to use that housing crisis justification to explain this decision.
I mean, yeah, it's like say using kids, like the protection of kids to like fight fucking, I don't know, like what they call fucking transgenderism or some shit like that. Like, they will use anything that is convenient for them to justify the actions that they use, right? Whether or not it actually benefits the individuals that they're talking about, right?
Decision to remove these lands from the Greenbelt, again, contrary to your findings, continues to justify it in that way as recently as this afternoon. Do you accept that?
You know, in our report, we explain why we do believe there is enough land without the land having been needed to be removed from the Greenbelt. And so, you know, that is the information that I stand behind.
Should there be consequences as a result of your findings?
Absolutely.
We did, we have a recommendation in there that there be a look by the Integrity Commissioner at whether or not preferential treatment was given to these developers by the Chief of Staff. That would be contrary to the Ontario Public Service Act. I do believe that there's others that might be looking at our report, determining whether or not there is anything that they need to do further with respect to their role and responsibilities.
Well, indeed, there are calls for the OPP to investigate in addition to the Integrity Commissioner looking at this further. You mentioned a little bit there, but what are the specific issues that you think warrant further examination?
I think in our report, we do have a recommendation there to look at improving the oversight by the Office of the Integrity Commissioner. We did find during our work that there is a lot of interface between lobbyists and political staff. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, and a funny thing about lobbyists, while we're on this topic, it's not just conservatives that are meeting with lobbyists. The liberals have been doing it too. If I'm not mistaken, I think the PM alone met with, I think it was or had a total of like 137 meetings with oil and gas lobbyists alone in the month of, what was it? I want to say June. Either April or June. I don't remember off the top of my head. But I'm like I know for a fact that, you know, politicians meet with lobbyists all the goddamn time. As far as I'm concerned, it should be completely illegal because it's essentially just a different way of saying bribing. But like, that seems a little bit like the amount that they've met seems a little bit high to me. Like, I think it was 137 times in the month, which is completely like insane.
Fine, lobbyists have a role, and you know, and they're working for you know, different organizations and trying.
Yeah, except that, you know, there's the revolving door thing going on with lobbyists and politicians, though. Like, God, I fucking liberalism so much. Just like, it's so fucking awful.
Trying to get those views heard by the political staff, but we do think that that, you know, when there are operational decisions that need to be made, perhaps that activity is taking away from the role and responsibility.
Yeah, except that lobbyists don't do that, though. The only thing that lobbyists do is pay corrupt politicians to get whatever they want, and let the rest of, like, us fucking toil around and fucking, like, die from, like, excessive amounts of, like, you know, waste that's dumped into the water, or, you know, allowing them to burn excessive amounts of fossil fuels, even, like, even making the fucking planet even more uninhabitable than it already is. Like, it's completely fucking ridiculous.
The public service in Ontario, and so that is an issue that we think is very important and should be further reviewed.
This is one of your final reports, in that you're coming to the end of your term next month, and I'm wondering, Auditor General Lysyk, where this report, this issue ranks in terms of those you've considered over the past decade?
There's been a lot of interesting files that I've had the privilege of working on with my team in the office. I started with the Oakville gas plant, and that was an interesting one when I came in. Did work on the Pear Hydro plan. We've had COVID reports that I think have had good recommendations, and so this one I would say is unique in the
I
sense.
mean, like, thing is like they don't even fucking care about actually doing or actually taking like the fucking recommendations to heart, right? Like they say sure and then whatever, but then they turn around and do it again. Like it just goes to show that they don't fucking care.
Sense that I had to work clearing this report with both the political side and the public service side. Typically, our reports and our work are done looking at the processes that the public service puts in play when they're implementing policy. In this case, the implementation of some of the policy was done by political staff. And so that was the uniqueness of this file. From an impact.
Is it really unique though? Because I feel like when, stuff like this happens, there's always like gonna be like some form of like politicalness towards it though, right? Like I personally don't really buy that because like like let's say that it is like a fucking company that is doing so and they want to like they lobby a government in order to to do something like this, right? Like that's very fucking political, right?
Perspective, I'm hopeful that the recommendations that we've made in this report will resonate and perhaps also resonate with perhaps other ministries that may be making decisions and implementing policy. And they'll think maybe about the relationship between the political staff and the non-political staff and take that in a way that there is more reliance on the expertise that does reside in the public service.
Based on what you've looked at, can Ontarians trust this government?
No. Absolutely not.
I think...
Absolutely not. Like, when we were covering, or when we were doing coverage of the Ontario leadership races that was going on during their provincial election, like I told people that Doug Ford has been very fucking corrupt. He's been very untrustworthy, and things are going to only get fucking worse if he gets reelected. Right? And what do you know? What do you know? I was right about it.
It's like anything. The government has to do what the government wants to do and thinks it needs to do. And at the end of the day, the public makes a decision when they vote. And so it's not for me to predetermine or comment on that. But, I think that's part of our process, right?
Oh, that's such a... Sir.
Ontario opposition parties say today's Greenbelt report means the housing minister has to go.
The minister,
I think it's more than just the fucking housing minister that needs to go. I think the fucking premier needs to go as well. But, they'll probably find... Like, I had a conversation with someone the other day about Canadian politics in general. I had mentioned that like I think the topic was it was about Heather Stephenson and the and her refusing to, you know, search the landfills for the indigenous bodies, right? And like, I had mentioned that it was hard, like, every single time when I thought we hit the bottom of like how fucking, like, outside of like fascism, on like how low fucking conservatives can go, they prove me wrong. Like I keep thinking we hit rock bottom, and then someone had mentioned that, you know, they had, or we had hit rock bottom a long time ago, and we found a shovel and just kept going, right? And like, honestly, you know, I do agree with that. You know, we just keep fucking going down and down and down and down. Like, it also doesn't really help that fucking Millhouse is like literally doing like Nazi shit. So, you know, there's that. Cause like he fucking like was screaming at reporters, essentially being like, that called him out on his bullshit and being like, you know, are you trying to fucking be subservient to the far right within Canada and all that? Kept fucking interrupting the reporter, kept lying and saying no. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure there, bud. I totally believe you.
Clark has to resign, and if he won't, he needs to be removed from cabinet immediately.
For me, what has to happen most immediately is for the minister to step aside, or the premier to ask him to step aside, and for freezing of development.
Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing joins me now, Steve Clark. Minister Clark, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Heather.
You and the Premier, Minister Clark, still insist that you needed this Greenbelt land to meet the province's housing goals. And the Auditor General was clear in her conclusion you did not. She reiterated that in an interview with me just now. So I'm wondering, to begin, why do you continue to maintain it was?
The report that states, quotes the Housing Affordability Task Force, which was tabled early last year before the election. Lots has changed. The economy has changed. Interest rates have changed.
Oh, God.
And housing starts have continued to change. So we looked at the situation with Ontario, with the amount of new Canadians which are coming under the federal government's new immigration. We're now saying, and we've said for quite a while, that we need a minimum of 1.5 million homes. So that's what we took.
Yeah, except that, you know, a lot of this problem can be solved by decommodifying housing. But I won't do that because your bald ass is probably a fucking landlord who makes a shit ton of money from owning multiple properties. Come on. It's not like there isn't fucking vacant houses just sitting there while people fucking die on the streets.
To the people last June, and part of my mandate, as the report states, indicated that I was to develop this policy and bring it in very quickly. And
Right.
I understand. I understand the concern. It's unprecedented for a premier to respond directly to the Auditor General report, but I was proud to stand with the premier and respond.
Yeah,
and
because you're just
indicate
as
that
fucking corrupt
we
as Doug
recognize
Ford.
that
That's
the
why.
process was flawed, that it was too fast. We recognize the suggestions in the 14 recommendations that are process related. And both the premier and I are committed to ensuring that we act quickly on those 14 recommendations to get it right. We need
we're going to talk about all of those, if you don't mind, Minister Clark, in a little bit more detail. But again, as you say, you were proud to stand beside the Premier today, and you did make repeatedly the point that this was to address the urgent housing situation in Ontario, and you cited the Housing Affordability Task Force. That wasn't the only information, though. Chief planners in a number of regions all said Greenbelt land was not needed. And even just a month before this policy changed, your own ministry indicated you'd already allocated all 1.5 million units that you had targeted before the policy changed. So again, I wonder, how do you continue to dismiss all of the information which is from, again, within your own ministry in some cases?
You're better in math than I am.
Because he's probably getting paid a shit ton of money to do it. That's how.
Heather. So the last 2 years, last year we had 96,000 housing starts. The year before, one of the highest we've had since the early 80s. We had almost 100,000 starts. 100,000 starts or 96,000 starts times 10 isn't going to get us to our 1.5 million. And we're using the 1.5 million as a minimum target. With the amount of new Canadians coming to our province, we need to do everything we can. And when we came and were reelected last summer, we made a very, very clear commitment to Ontarians that we would put a plan in place and we would have a housing supply action plan each and every year. You can do two things. In the middle of a housing crisis, you can build or you can not build. Our government's decided to build. But in saying that,
if this is, though, about creating housing spaces, why then are there no firm guarantees that construction is going to begin on these lands by 2025, no later than 2025? No framework in place yet.
We have a nonpartisan organization, the Provincial Land and Development Facilitator, that will be charged with working with the landowners and municipalities to ensure that those community benefits, things like roads and transit, parks, healthcare facilities, long-term care facilities, and the housing, including nonprofit housing, are built by the guidelines that the government has set forward. I have complete confidence that the Provincial Land and Development Facilitator will work with municipalities to get that done, to get shovels in the ground, and also get those billions of dollars of community benefits moving forward. It's very important that we continue to move forward in the middle of a housing supply crisis, and that's exactly what we've done. But at the same time, realize that we can have a better, more transparent, and more open process, and we accept the Auditor General's recommendations, the 14 recommendations that focus on that. I'm committed as minister to make sure that that happens.
Oh,
but there is no commitment
liar,
to what is
dude.
to many the key recommendation, and that is namely to revisit the land swaps in the first place and to possibly reverse the decision. Why will you not examine that?
Well, we don't accept not building houses in a housing supply crisis. We commit to continuing to work through with our municipal partners. You mentioned the housing pledges. We're going to continue to help them meet the goals. We've committed to Ontarians that a re-elected government under the leadership of Premier Ford, we'd have a housing supply action plan. And Heather, we've got a generation of Ontarians that are being pushed farther and farther and farther out of the market. Our government can make two choices. We can either not build or build, and we've chose the latter.
Okay. The Ontario Auditor General, again, coming back to her, you said you accept her take on the process. She says that you ought to have known what your Chief of Staff was doing, his activities all through her report. And I'm wondering, even to go beyond that, should you have known, and I think many would wonder, how could you not have known?
The process that the Auditor General outlines in her report, I recognize was too fast, was too flawed, needs to be fixed. I was unequivocal of when I did know. The report states very clearly when I did know at the end of October, recommended to Cabinet, and Cabinet made the decision a week later regarding these properties. Some of her recommendations have been referred to the Integrity Commissioner. Myself and my staff continue to work with and cooperate with the Integrity Commissioner in his investigation. But I want people in our province to understand that we are committed to taking the recommendations out of this report and implement them as soon as we can.
I really
it's
don't
very,
like
very
this.
important. The process matters.
Opposition parties, as you perhaps know, are calling for you to be removed from cabinet. That you might not have control over, but they're also calling
Oh,
for
he
your
should
resignation.
absolutely be
Will you
removed from
resign as a result
cabinet.
of this?
I appreciate the support the Premier gave me today, not just at the press conference, but
Yeah, the only reason why
in
the Premier is giving you fucking support is because, you know, he knows that you're on his side and will make the justifications for a lot of the shit that is going on.
terms of implementing the recommendations from the report. I think it's very important that myself and my team continue to show confidence in moving forward with what's been recommended to be changed. I'm unequivocal in wanting those changes to be made as soon as possible.
Minister Clark, thank you very much for your time tonight.
I really don't like him.
Hi, Premier Liam Casey with the Canadian Press.
Hi.
The Auditor General said you and the Housing Minister didn't know what Minister Clark's Chief of Staff was doing with the Greenbelt project. How did both of you not know?
Well, I look at it, we run a $204 billion a year operation. I have trust in my ministers, I have trust in our caucus, and I have trust in our staff. And I found out the day it was going to cabinet, and that's not unusual for a premier to find out what's going on the day before you go, the day of when we go into cabinet. And that's when I found out. I approved it.
Yeah, sure.
At the end of the day,
That's the day you
I take
found
full
out.
responsibility for the process. But I can tell you, we have a housing crisis, the likes of which this province and this country has never seen before. And the reason we have a housing crisis, because we have economic growth, the likes of which this province has never seen before.
Wait, what?
People choose
I'm not
Ontario
even sure if that's true.
from around the world to come here, raise a family, to start a business, to start a better life. And as I mentioned earlier, 504,000 people landed in Ontario last year. So that leaves 600,000 people that landed everywhere else in the country. Well, folks, I will put my bottom dollar on it. 40 to 50% of the balance of the 600,000 eventually will come to Ontario, because that's where the growth is. That's the quality of life.
I don't
No
really
better
think
place
so.
in the world than right here in Ontario.
I'd like to give the Minister a chance to respond too.
Sure.
I don't believe that.
We were given a clear mandate by the people in June, and I was given a clear mandate as the Premier stated to get a plan in place to build homes and build them as fast as possible. We're in the middle of a housing supply crisis. It's a severe crisis, and our severity required us to act quickly. I acknowledge the recommendations in the Auditor General's report that indicate that we need to make some changes. I respect that. I agree with those recommendations, and I will implement them. I've been very clear about when I knew about the properties. It was the week before it was presented to cabinet. But I have a very huge mandate for the government. I've delivered housing supply action plans. I've delivered strong mayors. I've delivered housing pledges for our municipalities. And the government has had results, as the Premier alluded to. The severity of the crisis dictated our government acting quickly. I recognize the changes that are recommended in this report, and I acknowledge that we need to implement them as soon as possible.
Premier,
Yes.
Did you or the Housing Minister or anyone connected to the government or your party receive any benefit personally from opening
Absolutely
up the Greenbelt?
not. 100% not.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely not.
Premier, it's Richard Southern with City News 680. It seems like you're admitting that some mistakes were made by your government today. You know, you say the buck stops with you, there were areas for improvement. Can you be specific with Ontarians this afternoon about exactly what was done wrong?
Well, I think the report says what was done wrong. The process should have been better, and I'm admitting the process should have been better. But when you're in a housing crisis, when you have an inferno happening, you know, the firefighters run to the fire. They don't run away from it. In my position, I have to deal with the crisis.
That literally has nothing to do with anything in regards to the housing crisis. Bro, really? We're still under a fucking air quality advisory. God damn. Wildfires in the Northwest Territories must be going on like crazy.
Because every single day moving forward and every day before this, I'll get in front of the media, get in front of the people, and what are you doing about housing? Every day when I met people, it's not about, I'll be very frank, it's not about
Yeah, except the funny thing is that a vast majority of those people probably have a way better idea on what to do about the housing crisis than this clown, right? It's not that there aren't houses to go around. People aren't that stupid. It's that housing, like the housing market, is way too fucking absurd that, you know, people can't afford, you know, basic things like, say, rent, for example. Which is why, at the very least, you need to have a fucking rent cap.
Greenbelt, almost every question is, my children can't afford the $1.2 million it costs for an average home in Toronto and the GTA. What are we going to do?
I wonder what are I wonder what are some solutions to that. You know, decommodify housing, having a vacant housing tax, you know, rent caps. Because, like, to be honest with you, like, a vast majority of millennials and Gen Z, or Gen Z, and fuck, even some, I've even heard some Gen X saying that like, owning a home, right? Like, owning their own personal house is not tenable in their lifetime because they're too busy doing things like, you know, especially like millennials and Gen Z are paying off like student loans that, and like for jobs that like don't even require a fucking degree, you know, to work in. And, you know, a lot of those jobs are only offering fucking $16 an hour. Right? So it's a larger, it's a way broader fucking problem with the hypercapitalism that's going on, right?
Majority of the grandparents, parents, and friends are the ones supporting young people to buy a home that they can't afford and never will afford unless it comes down to supply and demand.
Yeah, except that we have a fuck ton of supply throughout the country, but, you know, rich developers and rich landlords, as well as the fucking banks, love the fact that housing is commodified because they can keep fucking jacking up prices, and they know for a fact that no fucking government will do anything about it because they don't want the fucking they don't want the housing market to collapse underneath their administration.
We're going to continue building homes. We're seeing unprecedented growth to a tune of in excess, and I'm being very conservative when I say 500,000 people a year, because we know the other people that land across the country, if they continue on this pace of 1.1 million people, they're coming to Ontario because that's
They're
where the
not.
growth is.
I'll tell you one thing that they're not doing. They are not going to Ontario because of how absurd the housing crisis is. They are not going to Ontario. I can almost guarantee you that. If anything, the exact opposite is happening. People are leaving Ontario because of how ridiculously expensive, like, even fucking rent is. Like, I shit you not, I saw a listing in Toronto, or not Toronto, in Ontario. It could have been in Toronto actually, for $2,000 place that was literally just a fucking mattress on someone's bed or in someone's basement. That didn't include utilities. You didn't have a fucking stove or oven. Fuck, even a microwave for that matter. Like, it's completely ridiculous. We need to be doing what Sweden does, at the very least. It's having a housing first policy that helps get people off the streets and, you know, not have this fucking problem.
For Minister Steve Clark. Minister, it's hard for anyone that follows anything in this building to believe, I think, that you would not know what your chief of staff is doing on such a big file. How did you not know? And are you asking for that chief of staff's resignation?
Not gonna lie though, this guy looks like Steve Clark looks like he was a fucking cop before he became Minister of Housing.
And have you talked to the Premier about resigning yourself from this portfolio, sir?
I appreciate the confidence that the Premier has in me and my staff. I'm fully committed to the problems in the process that led us here to this report. And I'm committed to ensuring that the 14 recommendations will move forward and will move forward quickly. But at the same time, we have a generation of Ontarians that are getting pushed farther and farther away from realizing the dream of home ownership. We need to continue to move forward on our housing supply action plans, on our strong mayor proposals, on our housing pledges, and
okay,
on...
then like literally do one of the fucking proposals that like a vast majority of like even Ontarians have offered or proposed, but you won't do them because you think that, it's big scary socialism.
Intensifying around transit, all of those principles, we need to continue to move forward. The Premier has highlighted the growth that our province is experiencing. We have to have a housing supply plan that meets that goal.
Hi there, Alan Hale from Queen's Park today. So just to be clear, this chief of staff is keeping his job?
I appreciate the support that the Premier has given to me and my team.
That is
we are
fucking
going to
awesome.
deliver on these recommendations to the people of Ontario to add trust into the system and to provide that transparency that the report...
Yeah, except that you guys have not been fucking transparent about this at all. God, that reporter is fucking awesome. What a fucking legend, dude.
Talks about. We will continue. All of my staff will continue to work with and support the Integrity Commissioner's investigation and the recommendations that are in this report that pertain to the Integrity Commissioner. We will continue, my entire team, to work with him moving forward.
Mr. Premier,
yes.
You criticized the last changes to the Greenbelt as being the result of obviously how we put it, a bunch of staffers,
this is the clip I'm thinking of.
with
I think this is the clip I'm thinking of. Like, this is the part from the clips that I've seen him being fucking, like, quote unquote, terrorized by fucking reporters by asking them, like, basic questions and him, like, nearly fucking crying. Oh, this is gonna be awesome. I can't wait to watch this.
Crayons in a back room, but it seems like in this case, the changes were mostly decided by packets at a party.
Well,
Can you please explain why you guys, for months and months and months, denied that there was any problem here,
tears.
until
This
it literally
is awesome.
had to be dragged out of you by an Auditor General report? How can anybody in Ontario believe when you say there's no problem, and how can we be sure that you're just not gaslighting everybody?
Alan, the Premier's already addressed the information There is a big difference between receiving
Oh
information.
no, you gotta let them cook, man. You gotta let them cook. Come on. You can't just do that. Oh, you gotta let them cook. Come on.
Than advancing government policy before it has been decided. The Premier's acknowledged we receive information from a wide variety of sources. I can think most question periods, I receive an envelope from someone in the legislature about a particular plan, many of the times from the opposition. Regardless, the information that is in this report, the recommendations
no one cares about you,
regarding
Steve Clark.
how we receive
I want to
information
go back
is
to
extremely important
Dougie
to
Ford
us.
and watch him like
again, we will
try and
implement
hold back
those
tears
recommendations
for getting
to bring
criticism.
that transparency back into the system.
I would still like to hear from the Premier on this.
Oh,
Well,
this
I'll
is
just
going to be
repeat
awesome.
what the minister said. We could be sitting in the legislature and members of the opposition will come up and say, here's a proposal. I'm not against that. The best idea is
Okay, then why don't you fucking take their proposals then?
come from outside the government. That people will send in, no matter what government it is, by the way, will send in proposals to a certain minister or my office. It goes through the process and we look at it. And if
So something to keep in mind is Doug Ford's personal phone number was leaked like not too terribly long ago, and he claims that he hasn't been doing like any government official business on there, which I highly doubt, right? But he's very like he's acting very sus of like the whole thing surrounding it, right? So that, you know, they're just that's just more fucking corruption and you know, like even potentially collusion in there as well that, you know, we don't have. And I think Global News tried to get access to receipts of like texts or whatever or something like that, but Doug Ford didn't really like it and like it hurt his feelings and some shit like that.
it's a good recommendation, then we sit down and discuss it. But if it's not a good recommendation, then we don't move on it. But this all goes back to affordability. The number one issue facing Ontarians right now is affordability. We see gas prices jacked up. We see people losing their home because the interest rates were jacked up, that I'm dead against, and the speed they were jacked up from the Bank of Canada and the governor from the Bank of Canada. That's unacceptable. I've heard story after story, and I know the media has heard story after story. The last one I heard is about a woman up in Barrie that used to pay, I think it was $2,400 on her mortgage, now paying over $6,000. Her husband works 2 jobs, she's working 2 jobs, and they can't afford it, and they have to sell their dream house that they've worked their back off. That's what's affecting people. When they go to the grocery store and they see the prices going up.
Yeah, but a lot of that, like, I know like a lot of fucking dumbass conservatives love blaming Justin Trudeau for that, which there are things I can do for sure, absolutely. But it's mostly coming from like fucking price gouging from the massive corporations. It's, you know, something that you should take into consideration, right?
That's what people are concerned about. And then, be it the young families that need to buy something, that's what affects people. When they have to rent a place and they don't have enough rentals, that is what affects each and every one of us, including the people in the media. They have families, they have young families, and they're gonna go to you, your kids, and say, you know, Mom, Dad, I need a deposit. I need a deposit of $250,000 because the home we're looking at.
Yeah, but literally no one is going to be fucking buying a house in this day and age. Are you absurd? Like, no. Most younger people nowadays are going to rent over fucking over buying a house because it's just infinitely more cheaper comparative to paying off a mortgage.
A small little bungalow is $120,000. And by the way, if I go to a condo, and usually about 600 square feet, downtown is about $700,000-$800,000. They can't afford it. The only way we fix this problem is supply and demand, at least to level it off and make sure that we have homes
it's not
for
supply
newcomers
and
coming
demand.
here.
We
No
have
matter if they're
plenty
rentals,
of supply.
nonprofit, affordable housing, attainable housing.
Oh my god, I fucking hate the non-profit housing. If nonprofits were to solve the if we were to like let the if the nonprofits were to handle it and everything, and you know, do it in the good, from the good of their own heart and everything like that, you know, we wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. But the nonprofits aren't going to solve that problem, right? As well as, like, you know, you also have private industries like, say, Airbnb, which have completely eviscerated the housing market. Like, come on.
Housing, that's what we need. And that's exactly what our government's going to do.
Hey, Premier Minister, it's...
I really want that reporter to come back and fucking cook him some more. That was fucking awesome.
Minister, my first question is for you. In the report, you say that you were unaware of what your chief of staff was working on. However, on, I believe it's September 27th or 29th, you received an email from a lawyer representing one of the developers whose lands were later removed. If sent to your email, how can both of these things be true?
If I understand the email in question, it was referred to the government email and it was referred to the public service. I never saw the email. I receive, again, just like the Premier said, I receive emails all the time regarding ERO postings, regarding consultations that the government has. I receive unsolicited emails to all the accounts. Every time they're received, they're forwarded to the public service to review. And in this case, if I understand the email you're talking about, that was immediately sent. I never saw the email.
Yeah, sure.
Premier, this question is for you.
Yes.
If one unelected political staffer in charge of a group of public servants in a short period of time can, at the behest of a small group of individuals who are going to make several billions of dollars off of a decision, direct these public servants to come up with this plan that then makes its way through cabinet and is approved that way, if that is the process of how things work, how can Ontarians trust the government's decision-making?
Well, Charlie, what I did say, we will take 14 of the 15 recommendations from the report.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I've directed my staff to immediately action those items. And we're going to make sure that 14 of the 15 are going to be covered off.
Yeah, but the funny thing about that is, like, you know, how are Ontarians expected to fucking trust a government that, you know, doesn't give a shit about them, right?
And that's what we're going to end up doing, making sure the process is a lot clearer. I take full responsibility if the process wasn't. At the end of the day, Charlie, people, be it yourself or anyone else in this room, need to be able to afford a home or an afforded rental or buy a condo. And right now, it's unaffordable for the vast majority of the population unless they inherit a house or apartment or a condo from their parents.
Premier, if the housing crisis was so urgent, why didn't you move to expropriate the 7,400 acres and open up that land rather than let some progressive, conservative, connected developers make, in one case, on one parcel, potentially $6 billion?
God,
wouldn't be
he's
here
holding
today
back
if
the
you'd just
tears,
done that. Do
man.
you regret not doing something
He
like
is
that?
holding back the tears.
Expropriating the land so that the housing could be built more quickly.
Rob,
Go ahead,
the
Minister.
Premier and I have been very clear on this report.
No, you gotta
and the
let him cook.
recommendations to improve the process.
You gotta
We
let
are
him
committed
cook.
to the 14 recommendations. to make a more transparent process.
God, I hate
moving
how
forward.
often fucking
We've
Steve
been very
Clark just
clear,
fucking cuts off
that there
Doug
needs
Ford.
to be a better process to
It'd
how
be
the government
way
and all
much more
ministries
fucking
receive
awesome
information. We concur
to,
with
like,
the Auditor
watch
General's
Doug
recommendation.
Ford get
But at the end
cooked.
of the day, we also are in the middle of a housing supply crisis, and we need to ensure that we do everything possible to get shovels in the ground to build at least 1.5 million homes. We have to continue with our housing supply action plans. We have to continue to intensify
bud.
around transit as part of our transit-oriented communities program. The government needs to move forward. The Premier makes an exceptional point. There's two choices. You either continue to build or you don't. We've stated very clearly, in addition to fixing the process, we're going to build.
Can't just focus on. You can't just focus on building. There are other measures you have to do outside of fucking building, right?
Expropriating the land instead of allowing some Tory-connected developers to make billions of dollars.
No, I don't regret that. I want homes built as soon as the government
Yeah, he doesn't regret it because he's getting fucking money from it. That's why he doesn't regret it.
starts getting involved in, you know, the home building industry. That's unacceptable. You let the market dictate. Folks, you know, this is about process. We're going to correct the process.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bonnie Lissick, the
We essentially already know what the Auditor General's breakdown was.
So this may look like a mere stack of papers. It's, you know, about 100 pages long, but it's from Ontario's Auditor General.
Yeah, the province's gerrymandering the Greenbelt is worse. From the Toronto Star. Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister Steve Clark halt the development of the Greenbelt and call on the cops. In their interview, that's just the start of the cleanup needed to in the wake of the damning Auditor General report that lays bare the gerrymandering by the progressive Conservative government to open parts of the Greenbelt to housing to the substantial benefit of a few developers. In a report released on Wednesday, Bonnie Lieslick described the housing dealing as biased and flawed after reading her 93-page report. The words shady and sleazy also came to mind. Her findings confirmed the suspicions of many that the entire exercise was driven by developers, which we've known about for as long as we've been talking about this, and even like beforehand, right? The rushed affairs sideline expert civil servants, Indigenous stakeholders, residents, municipalities, conservation authorities, and agricultural considerations, all deliberately so it seems to arrive at a preordained outcome. The fact that none of these lands are needed to meet the government's housing goals. There's plenty of land available outside of the Greenbelt, as highlighted by Lieslick. Only adds to the suspicions around how unseemingly haste. At the heart of this development scheme is Clark's chief of staff, who was appointed by the Premier's office and tasked to oversee changes to the Greenbelt boundaries. More than 90% of the 74,000 acres removed from Greenbelt were sites past the chief staff from two developers. Lisek wrote, two of those proposed sites were handed to him in packages by permit developers at a dinner function held by the Building Industry and Land Development Association. All property owners would conservatively see a value in their land go up by more than $8 billion. Keep that in mind. These developers who had direct access to the chief of staff stood to significantly benefit financially by having received preferential treatment through the use of a biased process that was non-transparent to the public, Lisek wrote. With some understatement, she stated, "We found how the land sites were collected was not transparent, fair, objective, or fully informed." She praised the investigative journalism by the Star, the Narwhal, and others that brought these concerns to light, and deservedly so. Astonishingly, Ford and Clark claimed they were unaware of the exercise to select the Greenbelt lands for development was so flawed. Yeah, and it was utterly fucking destroyed. That statement defies belief. It would mean that neither politician took serious the public concerns and criticism about the Greenbelt decision. Took no action to assure themselves that everything above board would, and never once thought to ask if there might be any truth in to those claims that developers had inside knowledge unfairly benefit. Ford and Clark were either not being truthful or they displayed a derelification of political responsibilities. I mean, to be honest though, like, Doug Ford is incredibly fucking incompetent, right? So, like, it's not even, like, surprising in the slightest. If they truly didn't know at some point during Lisek's probe, they would have learned the damning truth about their Greenbelt land transfer, yet publicly they continued their sham defense of the exercise. Clark must go. He betrayed the public trust in this debacle. As Lisek notes, he should have been aware of what was happening on his watch right under his nose. Yet there have been yet he was standing next to the premier at a news conference Wednesday afternoon to respond to a report. Both were defiant and unrepentant, quoting off their tired lines of the affordability crisis in an attempt to justify the gross failure of the governance. Clerk is apparently keeping his cabinet post, unsurprising. There are no apparent consequences for the chief of staff, and Ford rejects Lisek's key recommendation that the selection of the Greenbelt lands to be the Greenbelt lands be reevaluated given the damning results about the flawed process. I mean, we already know he's not going to do that. That means the development of these natural spaces decided by political staff and the expense of the environmental, agricultural, and sound paneling considerations will go forward. Asked point blank Wednesday whether the ends justify the means, Ford replied, "Yes, they do." No, Premier, you're wrong. Certainly not when the means is a questionable land transfer run by a political objective at the seeming behest of developers who stand to benefit to the tune of billions of dollars. The government's job is to protect the public trust, not betray it and take the stake of the privileged few. Yeah. Opposition parties call for opposition parties call so often for a cabinet minister to resign that Canadians can be forgiven for thinking there isn't always a compelling reason. But this time in Premier Doug Ford's Ontario, it couldn't be clearer. After what we learned this week, Housing Minister Steve Clark must be fired if anything like ministerial responsibility is to survive in Mr. Ford's government. Mr. Clark, Chief of Staff Ryan Amanto put together a selective, politically dictated process that gave preferential treatment to a few land developers by removing their parcels of land from southern Ontario's legally protected Greenbelt and leading to an $8 billion windfall for those developers. That's all according to a special report from Ontario Auditor General Bonnie Lysyk. The excuse we heard Wednesday from both Mr. Clark and Mr. Ford come down to two things. There is one is their weak claim of lightning process to swampland out of the Greenbelt as necessary to meet housing needs. The other is that Mr. Mantle kept them in the dark, and they didn't know he had hijacked the review of the Greenbelt lands swaps from civil servants and provided preferential treatment to developers who handed him packages about the land that they wanted to remove. But neither of those excuses matter when it comes to Mr. Clark's future as a minister. Even if both are 100% true, there is no question that he should resign or be fired. By now, we are well into the era of political shamelessness, ministers finding reasons not to fall on their words, and premiers and prime ministers are loath to fire them for cause. Federal Trade Minister Mary Ng was cited for 2 clear-cut cases of breaking ethics rules in December and did not resign. There have been many other cases of low standards. I mean, and this is like one of the main reasons why I'm like really pissed off with a vast majority of the 3 major parties, right? All that it is just different fucking colors of neoliberalism. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like when it comes to that, down to the the NDP side of things, I honestly think that like I think Singh needs to step down at this point because he sided with back to work legislation for the port strikes, yet he did a bunch of fucking photo ops with the metro strikes that were going on, as well as like there's a lot of fucking infighting right now with the NDP, so you know. But if Mr. Clark is allowed to stay on, the government of Canada's largest province is abandoning any nation of individual ministerial responsibility. Canadians in other provinces, Conservatives, Liberals, New Democrats, whatever, should take heed to, because this is the part of the general basing of the coinage of accountability. Mr. Amanto was Mr. Clark, chief of staff. Everything Mr. Amanto did on the Greenbelt file or anything else was in the name of the minister. Minister aides don't have any authority of their own. According to the Auditor General's report, the deputy minister of the top civil servant in the in the Ministry of Housing, for Mr. Amanto, was acting on the minister's instructions. So according to Ms. Lisek's report, officials followed orders when Mr. Amanto asked for a small group of bureaucrats to sign confidentiality agreements. When Mr. Amanto identified parcels of land that they should consider, and when he changed the criteria for judging them. This is mind-boggling. Ontarians are being told that one political staffer was able to take over the mechanicry of the government to make important determinations that increase the value of certain developers' private property by billions of dollars, and neither the minister nor the premier knew. Well, we know is a lie. That was, as Mr. Ford suggested, just a bad process that has to be corrected for those next time. Miss Lisek's rang the alarm bell that should have him calling in investigators and firing the minister. Mr. Clark's aide hijacked Mr. Clark's department on Mr. Clark's watch. After the minister is not responsible, then no one is responsible for what happened in the government's ministry anymore. Canadian governments are supposed to work on the notion of ministerial responsibility, which means, among other things, that ministers are responsible to the legislature of their portfolio. It has always been rare for federal or provincial ministers to resign over mismanagement, and the idea that ministers are personally responsible for everything that has happened in a government department is outdated. But the minister's staff is still just the extension of the minister. It's hard to fathom how this whole business went on without Mr. Clark even getting a whiff of it. But when gorgeous things like this happen in his name, he has to go. Instead, Mr. Ford told reporters the buck stops here. Well, he tried to keep the buck spinning. He is not the first political leader to do that, for sure. Politicians don't seem to blush anymore. The notion of a minister's responsibility has already been stretched by governments in Canada. In standing, Mr. Clark, and Mr. Ford taking bar.
We have.
All right, so let's move on to. Let's move on to our sexy librarian getting a divorce. I mean, hey, like, the one thing that come out of the divorce between the PM and his wife, that just means that fuck Trudeau crowd can slide into his DMs and be like, hey, you up? Because, you know, now's your chance, guys. You finally have time to slide into those DMs, message him, and then like try and hook up, right? Like you're the one you want to fuck so badly is now up for grabs.
We have breaking news now out of Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, say they're separating after 18 years of marriage. CBC's Kate McKenna joins us now live from Ottawa. Kate, what more can you tell us?
Diane, both Justin Trudeau and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau posted identical statements.
The best thing about this is, like, now he's fucking single, and, like, you know, the whole thing's like awesome, because now I get to make even more like jokes about it.
On their Instagram just a few minutes ago. I'll read it now to you. It says, "Hi everyone." On Justin's post, it says, "Sophie and I would like to share the fact that after many meaningful and difficult conversations, we have made the decision to separate. As always, we remain a close family with deep love and respect for each other and for everything we have built and will continue to build. For the well-being of our children, we ask that you respect their privacy and their privacy as well." So, of course, this is breaking news, as you mentioned. This is a couple that have been together since 2003. They met when they were co-hosting an event in Montreal, and they've been married for 18 years. So Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, very active during
the fuck Trudeau crowd, you know, just putting it out there, you know, you could definitely probably use some comforting still. It's not too late.
Minister's time in office, often seen side by side with him. Most recently at Canada Day, she was there, and we can think of the King's coronation as well. So she for sure has been a very active part of his time as Prime Minister. But, you know, this is not the first time a Prime Minister has announced his separation during his time in office. We can think of his father, now back in 1977. Back then, his father announced that he was separating from Justin Trudeau's mother, Margaret Trudeau. So there is some precedent for this, but it is definitely some breaking news here today.
Absolutely, yeah, coming as a shock, I'm sure, to many people. Sophie Gregoire, known for her very loving and emotional posts on social media, always so warm towards her family and husband. I'm sure there's a lot of buzz in the newsroom as well there, Kate.
Absolutely. I mean, this just happened. But to your point, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau really, in the last few years, has become known in her own right. I mean, she is a social activist. She's an advocate, particularly on issues like mental health. So, you know, this is news that all Canadians will definitely be paying attention to, because not only is he the Prime Minister, but she's also well known in a.
Unfortunately, like, after like a week has passed, like not too much has like really gone on past it, right? but you know, it's
a lot of circles.
Of course, you can't help but have your mind go forward to how this is going to be used politically, perhaps by the opposition. I don't know. What would you expect in that regard, Kate?
I mean, I can't wait. Like,
Well,
I haven't really seen anything come out from like even the psychopathic conservatives about it, but I imagine it's gonna be fucking awesome. So I'm really looking forward to that.
one thing that I noticed in the statement from the Prime Minister is that he's asking for privacy. Whether or not that privacy will be given to him, I mean, I guess we'll see. But it is important to note that the couple do share 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. And the Prime Minister has written in the past and spoken publicly about how his parents' divorce hurt him when he was a child and how public that was. So those are definitely questions that we're going to continue watching as this unfurls a little bit more, but no question that it does change in some ways the political landscape of Canada.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate. That's Kate McKenna in Ottawa.
Last seen publicly together on Canada Day, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, broke the news also together, with 2 matching statements on their Instagram accounts. After many meaningful and difficult conversations, we have made the decision to separate. As always, we remain a close family with deep love and respect for each other. News of their breakup spread quickly.
Plus, a surprising
Bro, even
announcement
fucking
from Canadian
CNN covered that? That's awesome. That is awesome.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau stunned his nation today. He and his wife of 18
Even
years, Sophie,
BBC, bro.
will be separating.
I didn't realize how
The Prime
fucking
Minister's office
far that
confirmed
went.
the
That's
pair
awesome.
have signed a legal separation agreement, adding both parents will be a constant presence in their children's lives.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think I think it's like, I think the PM gets to have his kids every other weekend, if I'm not mistaken.
And Canadians can expect to often see the family together. The couple married in 2005 and have
God, he was so handsome, man. No wonder why the fuck Trudeau crowd wants to slide in those DMs so badly. Like, I mean, who wouldn't with that, right?
kids, aged 15, 14, and 9.
Merci, Sophie, pour ta force.
Since her husband became Prime Minister in 2015, Gregoire Trudeau has been in the public eye. Meeting dignitaries from around the world.
We never went into it thinking, oh, this is going to be an easy ride. No. We were very conscious of what we were getting into, and this is what we wanted.
She's been an advocate for gender equality and mental health.
By loving who you are, for who you are.
Yeah, and like
you're making everything
that
else.
is one thing that I will give credit to Trudeau, right? Is that he actually has like improved like some facets of equality for sure. Like especially within like the LGBT space for sure, right? Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But like there definitely has been like, you know, the banning of say conversion therapy, for example, has been like really damn good. I think that was like I think that was a long time coming and definitely needed to happen, right? But like, you know, that is one thing I actually can give him credit for sure.
Possible. And let me tell you, beside me right now stands a man that I love deeply.
The two have shown affection.
Don't go yet, my love.
Oh, that's so
But
corny.
were also candid about the challenges of marriage, saying their own wasn't perfect or easy. Trudeau, a child of divorce himself. His parents separated when he was a little boy. Pierre Trudeau, the only other Canadian Prime Minister to split with his wife while in office. Sources say Sophie Gregoire Trudeau has moved into her own place in Ottawa. The Prime Minister and their kids will stay at Rideau Cottage, where she will also spend time. The family is asking for privacy, and next week will leave for a vacation together. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now then.
While this is a personal matter, it does have implications for the Prime Minister's office. Host of CBC Radio's The House, Catherine Cullen, joins me with a look at that. Catherine, what are you hearing?
Well, there are practical political implications in the sense that staff had to be briefed today on the news before it went public. Liberal caucus had a private virtual meeting led by Justin Trudeau's longtime friend, Cabinet Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who took questions. There's also Sophie Gregoire Trudeau's role as an at least occasional political spokesperson. In the past, she's given speeches at Liberal Convention. In the spring, she held an event here in Ottawa with U.S. First Lady Jill Biden. Now we understand she will no longer be a spokesperson in that same way, so she will no longer have government staff dedicated to her personal appearances. And inevitably, there are security considerations as housing arrangements change.
And then there's the question of when Justin Trudeau addresses this publicly.
That's right. He's taking a vacation, as we heard, with the family next week. We expect that he will make a public appearance, some kind of public remarks before that. So it does become a communications issue to be managed. And as Marina mentioned, the international interest is significant. He has led this country for almost 8 years. He's known on the global stage, one of the longer serving leaders. So this change also makes international headlines. Now, the separation is not in any way a source of political debate thus far. And given that it is ultimately still a sensitive personal matter that involves 3 children, it may stay that way.
Thanks,
I don't know
Catherine.
about that one.
You're welcome.
The whole thing surrounding or like, this is just like like free real estate for fucking Millhouse to like go in on the PM even more. Like, I'm calling it now. He'll probably say shit about like, oh well, his divorce didn't really work out, or his marriage didn't really work out for him. So who's to say that X, Y, or Z will work, right? Like, it'll just be wild.
After 18 years of marriage, Prime Minister Trudeau and his wife Sophie recently announced they were separated. And joining us to discuss this Canadian version of Conscious Uncoupling is relationship expert Jessica O'Reilly. Hey, Jess, how are you?
Good morning.
Good.
I'm great. How's it going?
Good, good. All right, so let's get to their announcement. In making the announcement, the couple said they made the decision after many meaningful and difficult conversations. What did you take from that statement?
You know what I take from that is that so many uncouplings or separations now need not be acrimonious. I think that if we go back 10, 20, 30 years, there was always this idea that there's some sort of explosive event. There's, deep, deep anger, throwing dishes, hurt. But I do think that what we're realizing now is that through conversation, through understanding, through growing into yourself and sometimes growing apart, sometimes relationships evolve. And so it's not necessarily that the relationship ends, it's just that it's no longer an intimate or romantic partnership, and maybe it evolves into a friendship. That's what I'm hoping. And I can't speak to their specific case, but I'm seeing more of that as a trend more generally.
Okay. Now, they also spoke about raising their kids in a safe and loving environment and talked about plans about co-parenting their children. As a matter of fact, there are reports that the family are on vacation together this week.
Also, far more common than you might realize. So first of all, we have data showing that co-parenting is good for the kids, right? So lower levels of anxiety, higher levels of happiness, lower levels of depression, all that good stuff. And we are seeing this across the board. I think I was here a couple weeks ago and we spoke about the fact that people are sometimes living as neighbors so that they can co-parent their kids. I know people who obviously can't necessarily afford separate units, so they're living separately in the same house. And for some people, this does work. And it goes back to that evolution of relationship. It's not that we have no relationship anymore, it's that we're just no longer romantic partners. So we might be parenting partners, we might be more like roommates, but we can still deeply care for one another. So 21% of people, according to some data, remain friends with an ex-partner.
That would be very awkward, especially in like situations where like, you like absolutely fucking hate the other person's guts. Like, that would be incredibly fucking awkward, right? Like, no shot it wouldn't.
Partner. And I don't know if you have any friends like that or family members like that who, like, I can speak for my parents. they definitely are still friends, and they take care of each other.
And I can say that for my parents as well. They've been split a very long time, but my stepmom invites my mom over to their house even for Christmas Eve. That's actually become a thing that we come together for Christmas Eve. So we've really blended our families. Let's talk about why and why that is so important for the kids, what message that gives to them.
I think it sends the message that even if your relationship shifts, you don't have to hate each other. You don't have to be hard on one another. And we know that when parents are supportive of one another, when they're not bashing one another, when they're not trying to create factions and pull kids to one side, we know that there are more positive outcomes for the kids. And we don't really need data to tell us that. We know better. Now, in the heat of the moment, when you're angry at someone, when you're hurt, when you maybe perhaps weren't ready for this split, it's easy to want to get as many people as possible on side. And if you are doing this, if you can avoid it, please do. But if you are doing this, you want to leave your kids out of it. You want to speak positively or at least neutrally about your ex. And remember that you're a team and you share a lot in common, especially if you have kids. You share the same goal. I think once you're a parent, your life really becomes about raising these beautiful humans, launching them into the world, and that's something that you're going to do together, whether you're living together as partners or you're simply co-parenting.
And you know, it is so important, so you really want to get this right? If you are separating, divorcing.
I'm bored of this. Yeah, we have, I also want to take a look at, like, we have one article from Canada, but I also do want to take a look at, like, some of the American articles as well. I think it'd be interesting to see the American perspective, right? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife Sophie Gurog have decided to separate, according to statements posted online by both of them. Sophie and I would like to share the fact that after many meaningful and difficult conversations, we have made the decision to separate. Trudeau wrote in a message post to his Instagram. Trudeau, 51, and Gurrig, 48. He's 50 already? He looks okay. Like, all political biases aside, right? Despite like how much I fucking despise the Liberals, he looks great for 51, right? Like, he looks really damn good for 51. We're married in May 2005 and had 3 children together, 2 sons, Xavier 15 and Katerine 9, and 1 daughter, 14-year-old Ella Grace. Wait, that's their names? I didn't even know that. Fucking political commentator, and I don't even know that. I mean, I guess to be fair, I just didn't really care. As always, we will remain a close family with deep love and respect for each other and for everything we have built and will continue to build. Trudeau and Trudeau wrote in identical messages. For the well-being of our children, we ask that you respect our and their privacy. I was gonna say, Sophie, a former television prisoner, has been a prominent presence at Trudeau's side throughout his political career and became a public figure of in her own right as an advocate for several charitable and social causes, including mental health and gender equality. I guess that's his Instagram post. According to a statement from the Prime Minister's office, Trudeau and Sophie have signed a legal separation agreement. They have worked to ensure that all legal and ethical steps with regards to their decision to separate have been taken and will continue moving forwards, Trudeau's office said. They remain a close family, and Sophie and the Prime Minister are focused on raising their kids in a safe, loving, and collaborative environment. Both parents will be a constant presence in their lives, and Canadians can expect to see the family together. The family will be together on vacation beginning next week. According to a source with knowledge of the agreements, Sophie has moved to a separate home in Ottawa, and the Prime Minister will remain at Ridge Cottage. Sophie will also spend time at Ridge Cottage, or Ridgeau Cottage, or whatever, where their children are expected to live most of the time. And the Trudeaus will share parenting responsibilities according to the source. Trudeau is expected to speak publicly this week before leaving on vacation with his family. Trudeau's parents, former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and Margaret Trudeau, famously separated in 1977. The announcement of Trudeau and Sophie separation was extensively covered by international media on Wednesday. Dominic LeBlanc, a cabinet minister and childhood friend of Trudeau's, was expected a brief Liberal MP about the situation on Wednesday afternoon. As reported by the National Post, a source confirmed that Sophie will no longer take any official duties, and she will not be provided with government staff or manage her own personal appearances. As recounted by in his autobiography, Common Ground, Trudeau and Sophie began dating in 2007. I don't really know about that. Perfect. We know about all that. Let's see what to say. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Sophie George Trudeau separated after 18 years of marriage, a high-profile split of Canada's most recognizable political power couple. The abrupt announcement Wednesday ends what was often described as a storybook marriage that united two rising Canadian celebrities, the politically ambitious son of like an iconic former prime minister and a glamorous television host in Quebec. We saw this. It's mostly just like going over. Oh, this is so. I don't know what fucking
Canada
sign. Fine. Move on to. Onto this.
Canada's electricity is some of the cleanest in the world. 84% of power generated in this country does not emit greenhouse gases. Now a plan from the federal government to make...
technically, if you want to be like really technical about it, technically everything does, because we still have to say like mine for the materials, which is incredibly fucking fossil fuel intensive, right? So there's that.
The entire electrical grid carbon neutral by 2035.
We know that what we're doing is not enough, because what we're doing leads to the type of summer we've seen in Canada in terms of climate impact and all around the world. So we need to do more.
Experts say Canadians' demand for electricity will double in less than 3 decades.
Getting serious about climate change means using more electricity. It's the most important thing we have to do. So ensuring that our systems are ready, that they're ready with plentiful, affordable, clean power is absolutely essential 21st century economic investment.
The regulations have exemptions, like for remote communities that rely on diesel. Utilities also won't be outright banned from using natural gas to make
I mean,
electricity.
I think it's time for an overhaul of our electrical grid anyways, because, like, not gonna lie, our electrical grid is incredibly fucking vulnerable, first of all, to, like, you know, whether it be, like, foreign attacks or even, like, natural disasters or whatever the fuck, right? As well as, like, it's just incredibly outdated, right? Like, I'm sure that there is way better methods of moving stuff through the electrical grid than we currently have now.
But they must offset those emissions.
I think the good thing about how well these regulations are designed is that they provide policy certainty to industry, investors,
And remember,
and communities.
net zero doesn't mean zero. You're still gonna have, you know, carbon. You're gonna still have CO2 being emitted, but remember, it's not zero. Net zero is not zero. Keep that in mind. As well as, like we talked about earlier, you know, the PM met with, you know, oil and gas lobbyists like 137 times in 1 month.
So that they can plan, and at the same time, they give flexibility to provinces.
But Alberta and Saskatchewan say Ottawa's timeline of 2035 is completely unrealistic.
Well,
We've
yeah,
seen the federal
because Alberta completely fucking halted the green initiative that was actually creating like 35,000 new jobs just to keep like the oil and gas industry that's already on life support alive. Like it's kind of like fucking like keeping your like racist grandpa on life support and whatever, right? And there's like no shot of like him making it, so you gotta make the difficult decision of, you know, pulling the fucking plug on him. It like I think like that's probably like the best analogy I can think of right now. Like they're trying so hard to keep the fucking oil and gas sector alive, despite the fact that, you know, it's completely fucking like, you know, getting eviscerated by like new technologies and whatnot. But yeah, it's completely fucking ridiculous that but not unsurprising that, you know, Danielle Smith will do that, you know, despite the fact that she claims to create that it will create so many more jobs, despite the fact that it doesn't. Like, fucking ridiculous.
Government put ideology before common sense, affordability, and reliability once again. These regulations seem to
remember, Alberta cut off 35,000 jobs because they don't fucking agree with the process of renewables.
completely disregard how the electricity systems actually work in provinces like Alberta.
Electricity providers say they are on board with the regulations.
They are very stringent, and so there will be a process for us and with government over the coming months to make sure that you know,
and
we
like
can get them
2035, like I personally think that's way too late, but like that is 100% reasonable. That's over 10 years. If you can't get a carbon neutral electrical grid in 10 plus years, you should be fired for incompetence. Sorry.
Right to build the system that Canadians need.
Canada's Environment Minister says 12 years is plenty of time to build a carbon-neutral grid. Doing so will cost billions, and some of that price tag will be passed on to Canadians. But experts say ultimately moving away from fossil fuels will save money. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC
Yeah,
News.
and that's another
Ottawa.
thing. Like, green energy nowadays is completely it's completely like it's actually unironically cheaper doing that than you know, continuing with fossil fuels. Watch this.
In a province where fortunes are tied to oil and gas and new wind and solar projects have been put on a 7-month hold, Ottawa's plan to clean the electricity grid is not sitting well.
The draft regulations are unconstitutional,
they're
irresponsible, unrealistic,
They are
and
not they are not unconstitutional, they are not unreasonable, and they are not unrealistic. They are completely constitutional, they are completely reasonable, and they are completely realistic. Anyone who thinks that is just speaking on behalf of the oil and gas industry. That's the only thing that they're doing. Like, they just fucking took the propaganda hook, line, and sinker. Either that, or they're being paid off by the oil and gas lobbyists. In the case of politicians,
make life less affordable for Albertans and Canadians.
What?
They will not be implemented in our province, period.
Saskatchewan's premier
That's
also
not even
says
true. That's literally not even true. If you look to somewhere like, say, China, for example, electricity is dirt fucking cheap there. Like, what?
This province will not comply. We will not ask our residents to pay the extraordinary price for the federal government's divisive policies, Scott Moe said over social media. Nor will we risk the integrity.
Do keep in mind where all of this is coming from. It's coming from specifically conservative premiers and conservative leaders and conservative ministers. Like, the oil and gas industry pays the conservatives shit tons of money for regurgitating their think tank shit that they've been spewing out since like at least the fucking 80s.
Of our provincial power grid to defy the laws of thermodynamics.
I mean, I'd like to see their numbers. I'd like to see what is it that they're assuming. I think they're right to say it's a heavy lift. I don't know that they're right to say it's impossible.
The federal regulations don't go as far as some in the industry feared. After 2035, the use of oil and gas will be more regulated, but the grid will not be fossil fuel free. Still, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers expressed disappointment that natural gas won't play a larger role in future power production.
I mean, natural gas is almost as bad as fucking like, oil. Like, it's pretty fucking bad too.
Keep investors away.
The scale of the energy transition is so large that we need all forms of energy, including oil, including natural gas. It's the emissions we don't want.
When it comes to cleaning the
but that's not going to happen when you have when you're burning fucking fossil fuels. That's not going to happen. Like, carbon capture technology is nothing but a fucking scam. I know for a fact that that idiot will be promoting carbon capture technology. It's nothing but a fucking scam. Let's be honest with ourselves, right? Like, there's been no fucking models or like intelligible models of fucking carbon capture technology that, you know, we would even be looking at, right? And like, even if there is, like, how would you implement that at a larger scale, right? We already have way significantly better methods of producing energy. We have solar and wind and hydroelectric, right? Basic shit that, you know, even China fucking uses. And then there is, you know, nuclear fusion and nuclear fission, right? Both of which are different. And yeah, it's completely idiotic to think that we can continue to use fucking fossil fuels, right?
Electricity grid, Alberta and Saskatchewan have the longest way to go. Unlike provinces with well-established hydro or nuclear networks, natural gas and coal currently account for more than 80% of Alberta's and Saskatchewan's electricity. A daunting transition the prairie provinces say they aren't willing to tackle by 2035. Heather Urix West, Global News.
They're not willing to tackle it because they're getting paid a shit ton of money from the lobbyists. That's why. That's the only reason
Canada's
why.
electricity is some of the
Oh.
cleanest in the world. 84% of power generated in this country does not emit greenhouse gases. Now a plan from the federal government to make the entire electrical grid carbon neutral by 2035.
We know that what we're doing is not enough, because what we're doing leads to the type of summer we've seen in Canada in terms of climate impact and all around the world. So we need to do more.
Experts say Canadians' demand for electricity will double in less than 3 decades.
Getting serious about climate change means using more electricity. It's the most important thing we have to do. So ensuring that our systems are...
Canada's plan for a net zero power grid by 2030. The federal government announced today what that will look like and how it thinks provinces can achieve the target even if some think it is not feasible. David Thurton has been covering this all day. He's with me now, David. This was much watched. This was highly anticipated. Give us the details we have in the regulations the minister revealed today.
Well, what we saw in these regulations, Heather, is how the government is going to fulfill its big ambition to have a net zero electricity grid by the year 2035. That's the big target that the federal government has in mind as they roll out these regulations. And the thing that the government keeps emphasizing is that these regulations are very flexible. It's a sort of choose your own adventure when it comes to fulfilling the government's dream of having a net zero electricity grid. So obviously the federal government wants provinces and territories to use non-emitting sources of electricity, such as hydroelectricity, solar, wind, nuclear power. Those non-emitting sources is what the government wants provinces and territories to use. But of course, we have provinces such as Alberta and Saskatchewan and Ontario that rely on things such as natural gas. And this was a big concern. Would these regulations require these provinces to phase out this form of power generation?
Yeah.
Well, we heard from the minister through these draft regulations that he's not phasing out natural gas. It will be allowed to be used in 2035, but under certain conditions. And those conditions require the use of carbon capture to suck out a huge portion of the emissions.
I mean, carbon capture is just a fucking scam to begin with. Like, anyone who again, we've talked about this time and time again. Like, we have no fucking, evidence that it even fucking works, right? And, not only that, it's going to be, very fucking expensive to do.
95% of the emissions, and there are some exceptions where you will be able to run gas plants without capturing the carbon from them, such as during emergencies, such as when the wind doesn't blow or the sun isn't shining, you aren't getting any power from those renewables, or if there's a sudden surge in demand. So on a hot day when people are blowing those air conditioners, or on a very cold day when people are cranking up the heat, Heather.
So a fair degree of flexibility then, David, to bring in some of those opposing provinces. What has been the initial reaction from those provinces?
Pushback.
Well,
I mean,
provinces
of course
like
it's going to be
Saskatchewan
pushback.
and Alberta don't think that this regulation offers a whole lot of flexibility. First of all, they were opposed to this net zero target by 2035 for the electricity grid before we saw the regulations, and now that we've seen them, they remain opposed. I mean, we heard from Alberta's Environment Minister, Rebecca Schultz, today, and she said that, this is a regulation that has been developed not through, common sense, but through ideology. She also said that this is a bait and switch, where the government is saying you could run your natural gas plants, just use carbon capture. She says those sort of stringency requirements, Heather, would basically just phase out natural gas plants. They would be forced to close, essentially, is what she's saying. She also said that, we can't just have these natural gas plants on standby, and take them out of the cupboard when we need them. That's not how a big power plant works. There are idling costs that go with it. So Alberta is very concerned about those issues, especially about affordability. Here's a bit more from Alberta's Environment Minister.
The federal government setting an arbitrary target of 2035 for a net zero electricity grid is completely unrealistic. It's also unconstitutional.
Nope,
and
not.
Of course, it impedes the affordability and reliability of our grid for everyday Albertans.
No, that's wrong.
Heather, just let me emphasize, the federal government emphasizes that these are draft regulations. So although there are provinces that have some issues with them, there is time for
honestly, though, when does Alberta not bitch about literally anything that is proposed by the fucking federal government?
To work things out, the federal government says these are not set in stone yet.
Well, that's the matter of these next 75 days, this period of additional tweaking, as the minister refers to it, or consultation. What's going to happen in the near term, David?
Well, there's going to be lots of opportunity for discussion. I mean, certainly Alberta said in its comments today that the one bright spot in all of this is that these are draft regulations. Nothing is set in stone. So there will be an opportunity for the province to have its voice, have its say. And also there's a working table or working group that has been set up between Ottawa and Alberta to discuss both governments' emission reduction plans. So that potentially will be an avenue for both governments to iron things out. But if you look at, the legacy of federal climate policy, someone was reminding me, it often ends up with the government imposing its will on provinces, whether that's climate carbon pricing, whether that is the single-use plastics ban. The government imposes its policy against oftentimes the will of these provinces. They often end up taking the government to court saying that you're trampling on our jurisdiction. So this is where this could be heading if the government doesn't change tact here.
David, thank you so much for covering this all day. David Thurton with me in Ottawa, and some of the things David was just mentioning, you're going to hear more ahead, because the question now of how will the federal government respond to the criticism from the provinces to this net zero electricity plan. Joining me now, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault. Minister Guilbeault, welcome back to Power and Politics.
Thank you very much.
You emphasized today, as you made the announcement of your regulations, emphasized flexibility and you emphasized consultation. And yet the opposition to what you've announced today has been very forceful. We just received the reaction to this from Alberta and from Premier Danielle Smith, Minister Guilbeault, and I'd like to read some of what she has said in her statement.
Though?
She calls your draft regulations unconstitutional, irresponsible.
Yeah, says despite the fact that Danielle Smith is literally trying to do unconstitutional things and just hoping that the fucking federal government will bite. But the funny thing is that they haven't really been biting. She is so fucking stupid, man.
As they do not align with Alberta's emission reduction and energy development plan. She's looking, as you well know, at 2050, and then goes on to say they will not be implemented in our province, period, and reiterates the word unconstitutional. She said they will endanger the reliability of Alberta's grid and cause massive increases in Albertans' power bills. So why don't we start there? Could you respond to her concerns, please?
That's literally just fucking propaganda spewed out by the oil and gas industry. That's all it is. We've talked about it time and time again, and just it's the same shit but just different wording. That's the only difference.
Well, first, what I'd like to say is that I've seen several comments coming from energy companies, including energy companies in Alberta, from workers across the country, from environmental organizations, from think tanks, who all are praising what the federal government has presented today. It would seem like the Alberta government hasn't read the regulations, because just a few days ago, Premier Smith was saying that the regulations would not allow Alberta to continue using gas post 2035, which is simply not true. If you take 5 minutes to read the regulations, we are allowing natural gas to be used under certain conditions in Canada post 2035. Premier Smith said that we would not allow natural gas to be used for peak energy demand. Again, that's simply not true. If you take the time to read the regulations, we are allowing natural gas to be used for peak demand. So those periods of time where we have, for example, in the middle of the winter and more in the summertime because of cooling, where we have very high electricity demand, we would allow natural gas to be used in those instances. So these are two statements that Premier Smith has made that are simply not true.
The use of the word unconstitutional, though, repeatedly through that statement, I don't know whether that signals to you Alberta's Sovereignty Act. And what if the province uses that legislation to say this does not apply?
I think we don't see eye to eye on some of these things with the government of Alberta, and it's unfortunate. They disagreed with carbon pricing, and that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the federal government won. And the Supreme Court was very clear that the federal government, when it comes to climate change and climate pollution, has constitutional rights to intervene, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're not telling provinces how to develop their electricity production in the coming years. We're saying that from a pollution perspective, certain standards have to be met. We're giving provinces...
Yeah, and guess what? There's like, 200 oil wells at least that are like open air and like not taken care of. And instead of like forcing the oil and gas sector to fucking, clean up what they're legally required to clean up, instead of doing that, we're just, she's giving them billions of dollars being like, oh, I hope this helps you, good sir. Like, come on.
Utilities, 12 years. The regulations I announced today will only come into force January 1st, 2035. So we're giving them a lot of time to prepare for that. And if Alberta chooses to challenge this in front of the court, obviously it's their right to do so. But based on the carbon pricing case, we feel we're on very solid constitutional ground to do what we're doing.
It's interesting, Minister, because a similar
that's just
reaction.
The thing with conservatives, though. Whenever something happens with that they don't like, they will bitch and moan and be like, "Oh, it's unconstitutional," right? But yet, when they literally do shit that's out of their jurisdiction and unironically actually unconstitutional, they're like, no, it's within our jurisdiction and our rights as a province to do so. I'm like, no, fuck that. No, you're wrong.
Has come from Saskatchewan and the statement from Premier Moe. He refers to constitutionally protected provincial responsibility, again contradicting what you've just said there. And he too, similar to Alberta, says these net zero targets are simply not achievable in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's still working on that 2050 framework that you know well.
That's the only reason
so even though not enforceable until 2035, I'm wondering, will you allow provinces that have a longer way to go, more to do to green their grid, will you allow them more time without any sort of penalty?
I don't think he should. And I think that they should be fucking, like, heavily fucking penalized if they don't meet it. Like, it's not hard. You could easily get that done within, like, 5 years.
No, obviously, the regulations we're presenting today are so that provinces or energy utilities comply with the regulations 12 years from now in 2035. And of course, if you don't try to do something, you can't do it. And those who say it can't be done have no analysis whatsoever to prove it. We've proven today. We've tabled documents that show how it can be done. And there's a number of independent institutions in Canada that have also said that it was absolutely feasible. The editorial of the Globe and Mail 2 days ago said, you know what, it can be done. Let's try and do it. And let's work together. I think we have way more chance of achieving it if we work together than if for political reasons we decide simply not to try and do this. And I think that a lot of the viewers who are seeing this understand that, especially after the summer we're going through in Canada right now with the forest fires, floodings, again in Ottawa today, I've seen images of what's happening there. We have to act to fight climate change. It's costing Canadians billions of dollars in economic impact. It's costing Canadian lives. Like, climate impacts are real. Climate change is real, and we need to act. And that's exactly what our government is proposing.
He's right, because the world is literally on fucking fire, and like, you know, it's not like politically beneficial for conservatives to like do anything about it, right? Like, you know, it just doesn't make sense for them financially, which is fucking like psychotic. But like, what can I say about fucking conservatives? They also sided with shit like, say, slavery and you know, like not giving fucking rights to like LGBTQ people or fucking like black and brown people, and still refuse to do that, right?
Do in a very reasonable manner and in a very flexible manner.
We certainly know how strongly you feel on this issue. I'm wondering how comfortable you were personally agreeing in this document, in these regulations, to allow, as you say, some natural gas, some diesel, some carbon emitting generation on the grid well beyond 2035. How comfortable were you with that personally?
I'm not comfortable with that at all.
Very comfortable. Starting in 2021 during the election campaign, we said that we would do that. We would have a net zero grid, a carbon neutral grid by 2035. We never said it would be a fossil fuel free grid. We understand that for certain jurisdiction, it's a bit more of a challenge than for others, which is why we're allowing for those flexibility mechanisms. But it's important to understand that between 2035 and 2050, those regulations will allow to reduce carbon pollution by more than 340 million tons. That's massive. That's what Canada has to do by 2030 to achieve our Paris targets. And that's just in the electricity sector. So this is a very important measure to help Canada do its part to fight climate change. Obviously, climate change is a global issue, and we need to work globally to do that. But I can't go and sit down in front of countries like China or India or others of our peers and say, hey, you need to act to fight climate change if we're not willing to do it here in Canada.
Yeah,
and that's
the funny thing is that, you know, China has actually done like significantly better in reducing the amount of carbon emissions that they have that they produce than we have. Like, that's the funny thing about bringing up China.
Exactly what we're doing, and frankly, those regulations that I announced today are very similar to the ones that the United States presented just a few months ago.
Yeah, which is like the bare fucking minimum. Like, keep that in mind.
Very aligned with our other G7 partners who are all wanting to have a net zero grid by 2035.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that environmental groups, which you've heard from thus far, are positive about what they've heard, but not uniformly. The Environmental Defense issued a statement, again, in response to what was revealed today, saying these regulations currently drafted will not deliver on the promise of a net zero grid by 2035. And they list a number of concerns, one of which is the time frame you mentioned, no enforcement of the standards for those next 12 years. But they're also concerned about that time frame you mentioned of allowing some fossil-fired units to be commissioned up until the end of next year and not phased out for another 20 years beyond that. So that could see, again, some carbon emissions on until the early 2040s, theoretically. How do you plan to address concerns like those?
I don't know if you have their press release in front of you, but I read it. And in the first paragraph, what they say is that they applaud the federal government for presenting these regulations today, and that these regulations will play a significant role in helping Canada achieve our climate change target. And of course,
I fucking hate liberals and like them doing the bare fucking minimum. Like, at best, like, oh my, it's just the same shit over and over again. They're just going in circles. I fucking hate. Okay, let's move on to the metro strikes that were happening a little while ago.
For some Toronto Metro employees, the company's financial update feels like an insult. Robert Dixon has worked for Metro for more than 2 decades.
We never shut down all through COVID, and they continue to make record profits, and none of it came down to us.
The third quarter, which ended on Canada Day, saw the grocers' net earnings up 26% to $346.7 million. Sales across the board also increased by nearly 10% to $6.4 billion. For workers like Robert, it has just added fuel to the front lines of the strike.
To the point now where we can't even afford to shop in our own stores. We can't afford to live in the neighborhoods where our stores are. And we can't afford the gas to commute in.
The 3,700 Metro workers from 27 different stores hit picket lines at the end of July after voting down a tentative agreement. In a statement, the company's president and CEO noted disappointment around the labor dispute and is looking forward to a swift resolution.
Remember, when we talk about unions going on strike and all that, like time and time again on the broadcast, especially like recently, like we've been doing a lot of coverage on it. It's not a left or right thing. It's about equality, right? And how the fucking the media will always weaponize workers going on strike to try and like divide the population, right? As well, despite the fact that striking generally tends to be seen in a more positive light than on mainstream news, right? Or just news in general, it tends to be more it tends to be viewed as more like of a good thing when it happens, right? As well as, like I say time and time again, there's two sides to a strike. There's, the workers who are justified on going on strike and performing work stoppages, which is the whole fucking point of a strike, to improve working conditions, improve their pay, improve a lot of shit outside of that as well. Like media and like CEOs and everything will always make it about fucking pay, right? Even though it's not always the case. And and then the other side of that is the CEO or the government or whoever it is can come to the table and give in to their reasonable demands, right? Like, I imagine that the union that is asking for the union that's doing the negotiating for the workers is have like reasonable like demands that they want to make, right? Like we saw it with the UPS strikes, right? And how like their drivers are finally going to be getting air conditioned units when they work out in the fucking blazing heat, right?
Solution. Despite both parties reaching terms, workers are looking to secure higher wages, better conditions, and job stability.
We have to have a living wage here, and our members are going to stay out here until this message gets to everyone.
Unifor, the union that represents...
Yeah, and the reason why like CEOs and everything are so fucking terrified of workers going on strike and unionization and everything is because they know that they have to treat their workers better, right? And work stoppages absolutely fucking terrify them.
Presents Metro workers
because they're not bringing money.
Most of the employees are part-time and can earn less than $17 per hour. Workers' rights groups say given many grocery chains dropped their hero pay, $2 top-up, and growing earnings from these companies, this action is a larger symbol for what is taking place across the country.
I think people are saying enough is enough. This is unfair. We have gone through a lot, and you need to recognize
and
that.
I find it kind of funny how like those who were like deemed essential during, you know, COVID are getting paid like, you know, dirt fucking cheap. But yet when it came down to like post COVID, they're just like, yeah, no, fuck you guys. You guys are replaceable. Like it's completely psychotic, right?
I think it is a bit of a reckoning right now.
The company says it received a tax benefit, and without it, net earnings would have increased 11% or $314 million. Kyle Benning, Global News.
Like that's not even going into the unionization of that's not even going into the unionization of like a whole bunch of other places that are like starting to get unionized, which, you know, makes me incredibly happy. Oh.
Hi there, I'm John Oliver. Hi there, I'm John Oliver, and I'm on the picket line today.
Oh yeah, I forgot that there was more updates on the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild strikes. Like, yeah, John Oliver was on fucking strike with the Writers Guild, which is awesome.
It's the Writers Guild.
Another entertainment A-lister showing solidarity with striking.
I mean, to be fair though, I also do like John Oliver a lot though, so I'm not really surprised that he would join them on strike.
Performers and writers.
The workers united, will never be defeated.
As the standoff south of the border drags on, the hit to Hollywood North deepens.
There is absolutely no production going on.
The sprawling Vancouver film studios was once bustling with productions like The Flash. In a flash, the whole industry has all but ground to a halt.
There's 80,000 people.
Yeah, and like that's the whole point of a strike. It's to you know, it's for work stoppages and reminder that strikes are always the last resort option, right? So like, you know, keep that in mind.
That work in the film and television industry in British Columbia. That's bigger than forestry, mining, and fishing combined. And 90% of them are out of work right now.
Rewind to 1960, the last time a dual strike virtually shut down Hollywood. Ronald Reagan was president of the Screen Actors Guild back then, and money was an issue.
No contract! No contract!
It still is today.
86% of our members cannot meet the $26.5 thousand a year threshold to get their medical benefits.
This time, cutting-edge issues are at play, including the use of artificial intelligence.
It's necessary that this, labor action has happened in my mind.
Many Canadians, like script supervisor Michael Williams, support the fight to limit big studios' use of AI.
Yeah,
I got
and
into
like,
this because I love telling.
You know, it's completely understandable. It's the same thing, or it's the same reasoning on why the Actors Guild is on strike with the Writers Guild. It's the same reason, right?
Stories and just simply give it to the robots. That's it's going to create procedurally generated mediocrity, but does it have a point of view? Certainly not.
I mean, that's also just like the whole thing with like capitalism, though, is that it doesn't matter if something created will be like either beneficial to society or like be good for it or whatever. You'll always get like repeats of the same mediocrity, which is why you see like fucking bottled water, for example, right? And like how there's like 500,000 different brands of fucking bottled water, right?
The Toronto International Film Festival is just a month away. It will still go on, but without big U.S. stars if the strikes aren't settled. And right now, negotiations remain
It's
stalled.
Jack Black.
Travis
Let's
Ganrash,
go.
CBC News, Toronto.
Love Jack Black too, man. Fucking awesome. So yeah, we'll do a little bit more coverage of the Metro strike. Amid the ongoing strike by Metro workers in Toronto, the grocery giant says Infor refused its request to meet with the bargaining committee, which I don't believe, to be honest with you. Because keep in mind, this is coming from higher ups at Metro. Metro Inc. spokeswoman Mary Claude Bacon. Really? That's fucking awful. Says in a statement that Metro's bargaining committee reached out to Unifor over the weekend and offered to meet as soon as Sunday or Monday. But Unifor says it's waiting for an acceptable offer from Metro, which is that's just around 37,000 Metro workers have been on strike since late July at 27 stores across the Greater Toronto Area. The workers voted against a tentative agreement that Unifor National President Lana Hayan described as best in decades, choosing instead to strike and demand more from their employer. Bacon says the tentative agreement included paid sick days for part-time workers, improvements in benefits and pensions, and significant wage increases. Metro Inc. says on Wednesday that its earnings surged in the latest results, fueled by higher same-store sales and a favorable tax ruling as the company faces ongoing strikes at 27 of its Greater Toronto's area stores. The quarter ended July 1st. The grocery and drugstore retailers said net earnings skyrocketed by 26% to $346.7 million from $235 million a year earlier. Metro said the massive gain in its third quarter are due to, in part, a tax benefit after the Canada Revenue Agency granted capital loss to the company that had previously been disallowed. Nonetheless, adjusted the net earnings rose 11% to $314.8 million last quarter from $283.8 million the year before. Adjusted fully diluted net earnings leaped 14% to $1.35 per share from $1.18 per share. The adjusted profits, which beat analyst expectations of $1.29 per share. According to financial markets data firm Retentive, come as 3,700 Metro workers are on strike as they push for higher pay and other improvements. I fucking hate it when it's always just, oh, they want higher pay. Oh, they want higher pay. Like, Yeah, that is part of it, but it's not the only fucking part of what they want. Like, oh my god, pisses me off so fucking much, man. Workers walked off the job on July 29th after rejecting a tentative agreement reached with the union bargaining committee, to the disappointment of the company. Okay, who fucking cares? Let the company be, you know, disappointed at them for not liking the agreement that was put forward. Oh no, heaven forbid. We are clearly disappointed given that we have worked constructively with the union and the employees bargaining committee with to reach a very good agreement providing significant pay increases that are unanimously recommended to the employees, said the chief executive Eric Flechet on an hearing call Wednesday. We will remain committed to the bargaining process and look forward to a resolution and the reopening of our stores as soon as possible while ensuring the long-term competitiveness of our company. Yeah, sure. Unifor National President Lana Payne said in a statement that the company's profits showed Metro has no excuse to not meet their workers' demands, as the union called for the company to come back to the table with an improved wage offer. The Montreal-based company said sales increased by 10% to $6.43 billion from $5.83 billion a year prior, boosted by the same-store sales growth of 9%. The company's gross margin on food was down slightly from last year as the company absorbed more food inflation costs and as customers continue to shift to discount brands, said Leflechet. I mean, I wonder why. Like, what the fuck are you going on about? The company, there are no limits to what we can change to our customers. The company said in its outlook that it is seeing some moderation in food inflation, but that remains to be elevated compared to the pre-pandemic levels. It said that as part of its push of competitiveness, it will be launching a state-of-the-art automated distribution center north of Montreal in the coming weeks. That's probably what it is. I think that's why they're on strike. That's probably what it is. Oh, I can almost guarantee you this is what it is. Like, no shot, it's not. Like, to me, what that says, to me, what this means is that they're going to be, you know, taking jobs away from people. As profits at Metro Inc. Surge past analysis expectations in the third quarter, prompting criticism from the union that represents thousands of workers on strike at more than 24 of its Toronto supermarkets. In response to the Metro's earnings update on August 9th, Uniform Canada's largest private sector union said grocery clerks deserve their fair share of the company's double-digit profit gain. Frontline grocery workers need to come back to the table with an improved wage offer, Uniform spokesperson Paul White said in a statement. But Metro Chief Executive Eric Flichet said he wants a deal with the union that ensures the company stays competitive in the grocery industry amid stubborn food inflation that has forced customers to become more and more price sensitive. The comments from both sides suggest a stalemate, which has shut down 27 stores across more than 10 days and is likely to drag on. Negotiators with Metro and Unifor Local 414, which represent roughly 37,000 Metro workers, stores in and around Toronto have not returned to the bargaining table since the union members rejected the tentative agreement and walked off from the job on July 29th. Clearly disappointed, LaFlanche said. LaFlanche told analysts during quarterly conference call on August 9th. The union says its members want more money. The first year of any contract to replace a $2 hourly wage bonus increase workers received during the pandemic, but one of the union's negotiators also said that Metro has made it clear there's no more money, which I don't believe. LaFichet said Metro wants to reopen stores as soon as possible while ensuring long-term competitiveness of our company. We have reached an agreement that was unanimously recommended by union representatives, he said in a company's hearings update. August 9th, Metro reported a boost of profits, which we know about. It's just all. Yeah, like. Just like, oh, they want better work, or they want better wages. About that good.
If you're searching for news on Facebook or Instagram, you won't.
I forgot Meta is like pulling fucking news from its platforms, which is so fucking stupid.
Find it. Meta is blocking news on their platforms in retaliation for C18, which requires tech giants to pay publishers and broadcasters for sharing their content.
You cannot block access to news, which deprives Canadians of news.
News Media Canada, the CBC, and the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, which includes Global News, are urging Canada's Competition Bureau to investigate what they're calling Meta's abuse of its dominant position.
They control something like 70% of the market.
C18 is meant to bring advertising dollars back into shrinking newsrooms. In a statement, Heritage Minister Pascal Saint-Onge says Meta would rather block their users from accessing good quality and local news instead of paying their fair share to news organizations.
I mean, local news is also very biased towards like the white suburban mom and like the racist fucking dipshits as well.
But the tech giant calls C18 unfair and unworkable.
What the platforms want to do
here
is
the funny
they
thing
want to
about that though is that Australia has similar legislation as well as the EU. So I don't see what the fucking problem is here.
Avoid regulation.
Media experts question how much the complaint will actually accomplish.
The Competition Bureau is known for taking a long time to come to a decision.
Facebook has done this before when Australia introduced similar legislation.
There it is.
The impasse eventually ended, and tech companies now pay Australian news organizations approximately $200 million a year.
The reason it worked in Australia is the Australian government got out of the way and went back to the status quo, which is letting the platforms and the news industry work out their own deals.
The Competition Bureau confirms it has received the complaint, but it won't comment on what kind of recourse, if any, it will take. The Bureau insists examining the conduct of large digital companies remains a top priority. Taria Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
As Meta follows through on its threat to block Canadian news on Facebook and Instagram, media outlets including
I don't know if
CBC
they've
want
actually reached an
Canada's
agreement
Competition Bureau
or
to
not.
investigate.
It's an abuse of their dominant position. Essentially, what they've done is they are
old.
denying
Very old.
news publishers and broadcasters audience in Canada. But moreover, because of that, they're also denying us advertising revenue at the same time.
Meta and Google combined make 80% of all digital advertising profits in Canada. The Online News Act will soon require tech giants to pay media organizations for posting links to their news stories. Meta calls that unfair, writing, "The only way we can reasonably comply with this legislation is to end news availability for people in Canada." The federal government and news media accuse Meta of leaving the table before deals are even worked out.
Yep. Google's engaged in that process. And what we would say to Meta is pick up a pen and get engaged. There's plenty of time to make sure that your input is in the regulations, so get in the game.
The Competition Bureau says it was already investigating Meta's actions, writing, "As the Bureau's preliminary review is ongoing, and there is no conclusion of wrongdoing at this time, it would be inappropriate to speculate as to potential outcomes, timing, or appropriate next steps." Some question what the Bureau can do.
Canada has one of the weakest competition acts of any developed democracy.
Mhm.
I don't think
That's true.
it is likely that could succeed if they did investigate.
And Meta is unlikely to back down easily.
For Meta, it's really critical for them currently to hold their position because they know that Canada can set an important precedent internationally.
Competition bureaus have levied penalties against big tech companies before. 2 years ago, France fined Google €500 million.
There is, like I said, you know, the EU has done it too. So the fact that, you know, Meta is pulling this shit is just another fucking way of them being like, oh, well, we don't want to do what you want. We don't want to follow your regulations, essentially.
For failing to negotiate deals with news organizations there. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News.
All right. For media outlets in the province, the announcement of Meta banning news on their platforms has been disheartening thanks to Bill C-18. Canada's Online News Act requires platforms to pay for news content. Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, opted to ban news. Holly Funk, the editor-in-chief of Carlon, a news publication run through the University of Regina, said she was originally excited to see some support for journalism had Meta platforms paid for news content, but her excitement was short-lived. This puts up barriers for people trying to access news content if they simply don't know where to look, she said. It's actually really difficult to get over the first step and find good critical news content you want to be consuming. It seems more like a corner to cut budget-wise, and that's a little insulting to journalists everywhere. Harry Benjo is the editor of the Eagle Feather News, a Saskatchewan-based publication which focuses on Indigenous content. As a smaller paper, Eagle Feather heavily relies on social media to reach audiences across Canada. We told stories of our communities, but we also need to spread that message everywhere. We have upcoming elections. We have a provincial, municipal, federal. News plays such a big role in the democratic process. It is just such a terrible time for this to happen, Benjo said. While the newsrooms are working to ensure their content is still available. Benjo encourages the public to take their own steps to ensure they are keeping informed. It's time for the public to come and maybe put in a little extra work. Subscribe, download the apps, and access the news that way, she said. But yeah, this is we'll be going into like a little bit of like what Australia did as well, because like Australia had similar legislation passed as well. Back in February 2021, Facebook blocked news on its platforms across Australia to protest a proposed law that would have forced it, along with Google, to pay media companies across to pay media companies to stories applying to their site. About a week later, Facebook and Google struck a deal with the Australian government, and the restriction stopped, yet Canada, such a deal never marginalized. Said Ottawa passed the Online News Act in June, requiring tech giants to pay news outlets for content they share or otherwise propose. Or repurpose, sorry. And on Tuesday, Facebook's parent company Meta responded by announcing it has officially begun to end news availability on its platforms in Canada. So did Canada miss an opportunity to secure its own deal to avoid the current situation? Before Ottawa passed its law, Meta and Google had both threatened to block the sharing of news on their platforms in Canada. It feels like there were many that put a great deal of stock in the Australian situation, and it thought that, well, this is just all just a bluff, and they will ultimately come back to the table, said University of Ottawa law professor Michael East, who is also the Canadian research chair in internet and e-commerce law. As Geist pointed out in a recent blog, some Canadian industry leaders, lobbyists, and academics were, before the bill passed, assuring the Senate that Meta would back down. I think it is fundamental. I think it was a fundamental misreading of what took place in Australia, he said. The legislation in Australia, where news media bargain code governs constrict between Australian news businesses and design digital platforms. Originally, however, the bill that was being discussed was similar to the Canadian law is now, meaning Meta and Google would have been legislated to pay news companies if their stories appeared on their platforms. That's what prompted Facebook's temporary ban. But the ban coming before the legislation had passed gave the Australian government some space to negotiate, says Dina Bossio, an associate professor in media and communications at Melbourne's Swinburne University of Technology. And that took out one really, really vital part of the legislation and its designation, it said. Now Australia Treasurer can designate and thus force digital platforms like Meta and Google to pay for news. But Meta and Google have not have yet to be designated. That's why Meta pulled that stunt in 2021, Bossio said. It didn't want to be forced to pay the legislation. It didn't want it didn't want to be forced by the legislation to pay, but under the implied threat of being designated, both Meta and Google made separate deals with a series of Meta companies in Australia, and those, according to Jordan Uo, research fellow at Australia Institute's Center of Responsible Technology, have resulted in more than 30 commercial agreements at approximately $200 million in value of news organizations. The Canadian law doesn't have that flexibility, says Geist. That was pretty important. That was a pretty important difference, where the Australian government had basically left itself with the wiggle room to engage in that kind of negotiation. Guest said, the Canadian government not so much. Alfred Cameron, a journalism professor in the University of British Columbia, says in Australia, the threat of being legislated may have led to platforms to make more deals with news organizations than they would have done before. But they still made those deals on their own terms, individually, privately, deciding who gets money and who didn't get money, and how much money for each outlet. Said, and the government wasn't involved at all. For both Meta and Google, it's not about money, but the principle of being regulated and the precedent it might set for other jurisdictions. Herminda said. That's why Herminda says it's hard to see a situation where in Canada where that could bring Canadian news back to Meta. Meta fears that if it agrees to be legislated in Canada, then it would be pressured to be legislated in other places, Hermida said. That's not just the Canadian story. This is the global story, he said. Given that other countries have places in the US look like this as well, Meta and Google don't want to be in a situation where they set a precedent saying, yes, we accept these laws and we will obey it. All right, well, I think that's it. So here, I gotta pee and get ready for stuff. So, yeah. Hope everyone enjoyed, and even though it was a little bit late on that, but hopefully I can get back into the swing of things soon-ish. But we'll see about that, because I do not know how much time I will actually be able to have for that, because things are gonna get busy soon. So yeah, I guess until